Welcome back to the swamp, my friends. Today we are going to be covering some strange and creepy night shift stories. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, whether it be a night shift story or something different, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that help keep this channel going. These are going to be a lot of fun, so be sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't. And be sure to sit back, relax, and enjoy these creepy night shift stories. I can't say what I do specifically, but no, it is nights and involves security of some kind. I am not working in the United States. I want to make that very clear. There is a local legend in the area I work that speaks of witches. Now, I know hearing that sentence, you are prone to laugh, and I was too upon hearing the legends. There are plenty of stories around children going missing, and many locals believe this is due to witches. I wasn't convinced when I first heard the stories, and while I'm not 100% convinced now, I am convinced something weird is going on. I work nights, as I stated before, and I patrol a large area. It's usually quiet at night in the area I work in. Sometimes we run into obstacles and we take care of that, but it is increasingly rare. That said, a lot of people have been missing as of late. 42 children have gone missing over the past 5 years. I'm not talking, oh, they wandered into the forest and vanished. I'm talking really strange stuff, like they are in bed and then they are not. In some of the places, there are metal bars over the windows to prevent burglary. In one such place, there is only one way in or out, and it requires you to go through the heavily guarded front door. A child went missing, even in a place like that, while people watched the front door the entire time. Suspecting tunnels of some sort, which wouldn't be out of the ordinary in the area, we did search for them, but found nothing of that sort. It is truly as though the kid just vanished into the air. Mind you, that's impossible, and I don't believe that's what happened even for a minute. I suspect someone on the job was paid to make the kid disappear. I won't go too deeply into it. While strange, there are possible or normal explanations for such things. Still, if they did do such things, and they cover their tracks very well. Why am I explaining all this? Well, to give you an idea of the strange stuff going on in the area, to provide as much context as I can for what I'm about to share. I work from the moment the sun sets to the moment it rises. I cover a large area and watch things. That's as in detail as you will hear about things in this story in relation to my job. Anyway, I was working my job one night when I heard a very distinct, childlike scream. I found this strange and immediately called for backup before knocking on the home I believed the screams to be coming from. Upon getting no answer, I knocked one more time, stating who I was, and if I got no response, I'd be knocking in the door. It was then a woman came to the door. She looked tired and pretty scared. I asked her if everything was all right, to which she said, yes. I asked if she minded if I came in as I heard a child screaming. She explained her daughter had a nightmare. I told her it was all right, but kept a close watch on the house afterward. It was then I noticed something strange. I could see a black vapor-like mist flowing from a window in the room. I shined a light on it. I heard an ear-piercing screech, and then witnessed the mist dart off and vanish into the distance. I'm not sure how to explain that, but I quickly knocked on the door. I was once again met with the confused gaze of the same woman. I informed her there was a black-like mist coming from the back window, and while I wasn't sure what it was, I thought it was enough of a security threat to check the home. I then asked if the woman's daughter was okay. The woman looked confused and said yes, she'd been sleeping all night. I questioned the woman's logic and explained we had just visited her home and said she had been having nightmares and screaming. The woman looked even more perplexed, at which point I asked if I could come in. The woman let me in and went back to the back room to show me that her daughter was sleeping, but when we got there, the daughter was missing and the mother began panicking. Now, her panic was understandable, but I wanted answers as to why she said her daughter had been having nightmares but then suddenly changed her story to her daughter having been sleeping all night. She assured me she had never had this conversation and that she had been sleeping up until the time I came knocking on her door to inform her of the strange happenings around her back window. Looking in the woman's eyes, I could see she was telling the truth and promptly formed a search party. We searched everywhere, including neighboring towns, but sadly, we never found her daughter, not even a sign of her. I'm not sure how to explain that, but it does bring up a lot of questions. While I obviously don't believe it was witches, I am perplexed by what the thing in that window could have been. Even more bothersome, if this woman really didn't answer the door the first time, who answered the door, and why did they look and sound just like her? How did this thing move so fast? Were the thing at the window and the thing that appeared at the door the same thing? How would that be possible? Most importantly, what the heck is that thing? I don't have answers, and I probably never will. But whatever it is, it stole a child, and even someone as a matter of fact as myself shudders at the thought of what might have happened to that kid afterwards. I'll always feel guilt over never finding the kid. I'll always wonder, what in God's name was that thing? My name is Danny, and I'm a night watchman for a local museum in my area. Yes, get all your night at the museum jokes out of the way now. No night watchman at a museum is as fun as that movie. And to be honest, most nights it's the most mundane thing you could possibly do. That said, it's also a very easy and well-paying job, and I enjoy it quite a bit. I've been doing this job for a good 22 years, and I'm getting ready to retire in about another 3. Every night of this job has been mundane except for once. It was back in 2009, and it is a night I will never forget. It was a Saturday night, and I was scheduled to work my normal 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. stint. You'll find that night watchman isn't exactly a thrilling job, and so usually, you'll, more often than not, fall into a very specific routine, route, and pattern. For the most part, it's super easy. There are cameras and a security room in this museum, and more often than not I spend most of the night in that room. That said, we are required to do foot patrols once every hour to make sure nothing is going on in the blind spots of the cameras or in the areas we don't have cameras. The biggest thing I typically need to be wary of is that someone isn't still in the facility. We have a lot of stuff in the museum and some of it is very valuable. Now sometimes I find a kid who snuck in somehow, or more often than not wasn't spotted by the day crew when closing up. It's happened on more than a few occasions. It's never been anything more than a stern talking to needed before I either called their parents or, if they're a bit older, escorted them out. I don't often need to actually involve the police as I'd never actually have anyone really fight me. Anyway, on this particular night, I was chilling in the security room, listening to my iPod while watching the feed. Everything was quiet, and I really wasn't having any sort of issues. It was your typical night. At least it started that way. At around 11, I got up to do my next foot patrol. It was then I realized something was off. I noticed some small things had been moved. A display had been tilted in a different direction. A hat was swapped out with a model gun, and there was this weird feeling that I was being watched. Weirded out, but not really feeling threatened, I looked around and called out. I should note, I wasn't playing my iPod on my foot patrol for obvious reasons. So I searched the place high and low, but strangely, never found anyone. This concerned me as it was clear some things had been moved around. I searched for a bit longer before heading back to the security room and watched the area closely. Everything was quiet and calm at first. Then, out of nowhere, I see a figure on the side of the displays move to the side, seemingly on its own. I jump up and head to the area only to find no one around and the figure pointed in my direction. Now this was certainly odd, and at the time I wasn't really sure what to think. I was never really a skeptic or a believer in the paranormal, and this kind of just confused me more than anything. At the time, I wasn't even thinking about ghosts. I was still convinced someone was somehow messing with me, and so I spent the next 2 hours covering every inch of the museum and double-checking every door possible. Ultimately, I never found anything. There was no one around. No strange noises, nothing. Going back to the security room, I watched things again. I was more curious and somewhat excited than I actually was scared because honestly, this was a far livelier night than I had ever had previously on the job. I mean, at least I wasn't bored sitting in a chair listening to music. I soon watched as the same display has moved back into place. It appeared to be all on its own, and seeing as I had no other way to explain it, I just resumed my normal patrol that night and didn't do any extended foot patrols or anything. Now in the morning, when I was about to clock out, I explained what had happened to the owner of the building. They didn't really care or seem to pay any interest into it. They simply asked if everything was still fine and I told them yes, nothing was vandalized or anything like that. I then asked about it and they simply said odd things happen from time to time around the museum at night, but never anything violent or bad. They thought it had maybe some added charm to the place, and the only thing they were surprised at was that I hadn't noticed anything like this sooner. After that, I went home for the weekend. I will always remember that night because it was odd, and I still have odd happenings happen around my workplace from time to time, but it's never been anything malicious and I won't pretend it is or isn't a ghost. It's simply strange, but past that, I'm not really speculating. I just thought you might be interested in the story and you could speculate over what it was for yourself. Thank you. My name is Matt, and I do night shift security around an old shipping yard. Most nights are relatively tame, but we do get some pretty large ships that come through the yard for repairs and such, and with that, there's a lot of history to many of these boats. The experiences I'm going to share with you happened in May of 2013. I wasn't new to this line of work, but I was new to this yard. I had recently moved and was contracted to watch over the area. I would say at this point I'd been doing this for only a month or so, in this shipping yard that is. Anyway, I made my initial rounds around the yard one night, and hadn't noticed anything out of the ordinary. Sure, you always get weird sounds or may think you see something out of the corner of your eye, but upon investigation you usually realize that it's just your imagination, or something easily explainable, like the boat making a sound in the water itself or any number of other normal things that aren't really threatening. So it was around 3 in the morning when I was checking the dock, and the yard itself after having made my rounds through the ships. At this point, I'm normally getting ready to wrap things up. Many of the workers get in relatively early for their jobs and I'm usually out by between 4 or 5 in the morning. I'm usually chilling and taking a break when I hear a sudden and loud grinding sound coming from one of the ships. It's loud enough that it startles me and also hurts my ears. Think like nails on a chalkboard, as that's how painful the sound was. I cut my break short and head to where I heard the sound. Upon getting on the ship, I then hear another sound behind me. The sound was almost like someone tapping on a metal pipe on the side of a ship. I turn and scan the area and think it's probably some kid who snuck in to mess with me, or maybe even one of the dock workers. The tapping stops and I hear it again, further away and back in the direction of the initial grinding sound. I shout out, "Very funny, you can come out now." The tapping stops and I hear it again, further away again. I then declare who I am and what I do in case it isn't someone I know. At this point, I'm obviously thinking it's a couple of kids or some of the other workers messing with me. I was newer and sometimes people would do this sort of thing in jest. I rush up and around the corner and see nothing. I quickly run through the ship, looking high and low, intent on finding whoever is messing with me. The ships I have to look through are massive, and you could easily get lost if you weren't careful. There are plenty of places to hide, so someone vanishing wouldn't be unusual if they knew the layout and where to go and how to hide. I was deep within the ship when I hear a pained sob. What I mean by this is someone is crying, but it isn't like a sad cry, but the cry of someone who's in pain. I can now hear it on the other side of the door. Opening the door, I look inside to find what I believe is a man cutting on his face with a knife and crying. Shocked, I ask the man to leave. The man just keeps crying and cutting himself. I tell the man I need him off the boat and that I can get him some help when I hear that grinding sound again from down the hall behind me. I look back out into the hall and it stops. I turn back toward the man and he's gone. The room in question is very small and he couldn't have gotten out of the area without me noticing. I'm pretty surprised and becoming quite unnerved now. People don't generally just disappear, and this guy had a knife. I start looking all over the ship and it quickly becomes apparent that no one is around. I remember checking my watch at this point. The reason being is when I checked I noticed that it was about 4 a.m, and at this point, it must be later. I'm thinking, great, I've got some guy with a knife who could be a danger to himself or others just wandering the ship, and I've basically got an hour to find him. I continue my search and turn up nothing. I check a couple of more times as quickly as I can before I hear one of the dock managers outside. I explained to him what I saw and how I couldn't find the man I'd seen any longer. I told him about the grinding noises and the strange events of the night. It is at this point the guy smiles and tells me, "Oh, he just met Crying Eddie. Yeah, we're all familiar with him, alright." The manager then goes on to explain how people will occasionally see him, and the first time he's usually the scariest, but also that he isn't a real harm to anyone, even himself. I, naturally confused, asked him what that is. Nonchalantly, the man looks at me and laughs, saying with all due respect, Crying Eddie killed himself years ago. I remember being in shock at how casually the manager spoke of this. It was as if this was nothing to him. Mind you, I've been around shipping yards before, and there's a lot of superstition around ships in the sea. Normally, though, you just hear stories about, missing people and things like that, most of which believe are just legends or are made up. I had never experienced anything like this prior to this night. I'm positive the guy wasn't messing with me either, as he went on to explain the man's story and the description of him to a T. I'll share with you what I was told. Apparently, Crying Eddie was a man that had been an exemplary employee at the shipping yard for about 19 years. He was due in for his retirement a few months before he committed suicide. The man had a wife and a child who, unfortunately, he lost in a car accident about a year prior to his suicide. Eddie would often take his breaks in isolated areas of the ship so he would cry. I think that seemed rational, as if I'd lost my family I'd be pretty broken up too. All that said, one day he didn't return from break. One of the workers found him, bleeding from several deep cuts to his body and crying about his wife and kid. Eddie would ramble in circles about how he missed them and how he wanted to see them and how he would see them again soon. His co-worker who found him tried to get the knife from Eddie, but Eddie threatened to use it on the man. Needing help, he called out to his other workers to help him. It was around the time help showed up that Eddie turned the knife on himself and stabbed himself multiple times in the throat, while laughing and crying and repeating the phrase, "I'll see you soon," until he could no longer speak. I remember feeling sad for the guy when I heard this story. I couldn't imagine losing my family all at once. I imagine it would leave anyone feeling isolated and alone. I haven't seen Eddie much since the first night I saw his ghost, but I do hear unexplained crying on that ship from time to time. I figure it's best to let him be. The saddest part is, if his ghost is on the ship, I feel as though that would mean he never got to be with his family again. My name is Sean. I'm 45 and I run my own private security company. The job is in the name. People contract us to do security over their places for a set fee. Some jobs are large and involve more militaristic duty, and some are smaller and only require we watch over someone's land. For privacy reasons, I won't say much more than that. On the night in question, we were watching over a farmer's land that we were contracted to spend the week watching. We get jobs like this from time to time. Usually, it is because they wish to protect their crops, or at times their land may be used as an out-of-the-way spot for drug dealers or other criminals to meet. Obviously, they don't want that sort of thing happening, so they have us watch the land. I should mention, this is out in the Midwest. A lot of farmland and a lot of woods as well. After the sun set, I got to work. I run a company with several workers, but I had others on other jobs as this farm seemed small enough to be handled by one person. I'm not the type to spook easily, and I've been through the Marines, so needless to say, I can handle myself. As I said, things were relatively normal at first. The first night came and went. The night the biggest scare happened was a deer popping out of the woods on the perimeter of the farm by itself. I know, terrifying, right? By the second night, I'd warmed up to the idea that this job might be the nice break I needed from a few prior which were quite intense, and I can't nor will I discuss here. Things were quiet, and I like that. The quieter things are, the easier the money is. You will never hear me gripe about a quiet contract. That's what we look for, and is also beneficial to those who hire us to get the peace of mind that things are quieter around their area. The third night comes and goes and still, nothing. I'm already starting to think about the next job by the fourth night, as it would be taking me out of the country. The farmer who contracted us for a Monday through Friday gig, so technically not a full week, but a work week. It was about 5 in the morning when I heard a strange noise coming from the tree line in the distance. I didn't think much of it, but I had a job to do, and I take my work very seriously, so I investigated. Now, I won't lie. When small noises like this happen, I can usually just write it off, but the job had been boring up until this point, and I figured I needed to be thorough, just in case. Much to my delight, I found the source of the noise was just a rabbit hopping along its way. Nice, I thought to myself. This is the type of gig I wish I had more often. I sipped some coffee I had made a little bit earlier in the night and continued to patrol the farm. Before I knew it, it was daytime, and I spoke with the farm owner who thanked me and said he felt at ease knowing nothing had happened since I'd been there. I told him I'd be by tonight for the final night of my patrol, and I thanked him for such a calm job. The farmer seemed happy, but he still seemed as though something had been bothering him. I asked if he was okay, at which point he shook his head yes, but asked if I could take a look at something with him. I told him sure, and I went with him to a room in his house where he had security feed from some of the cameras around his property. It was then he showed me something. On camera, there was a massive-looking shadow that walked around the woods on his property line. It seemed to move slowly and methodically, from camera to camera. Now, we couldn't get a good look at the figure as even with the night vision it kept a distance far enough away that you couldn't quite make out what it was. Now, my initial thoughts were it might be an animal of some kind, but the problem with that is that it stood on 2 feet, and the way it moved suggested it was, aware that cameras were there. It would constantly patrol the tree line. It at times stopped and lurked as though it was watching something and waiting. I couldn't make much sense of it at the time, and so I told the farm owner that I'd make it a point to check around those areas he had the cameras set up, and check out some of the woods themselves tonight. I figured it would put his mind at ease, and also I'd be able to figure out exactly what was going on in the meantime. On the final night, I took a Desert Eagle and a rifle and headed toward the tree line. I slowly watched and waited through the night. By about midnight I had seen nothing. I was very cautious in my movements and kept an eye all around me. I didn't see anything, but I felt like something was around. You'll know the feeling I speak of if you've ever been home alone at night and you suddenly feel like you're being watched or someone is near you. I looked high and low in the area and I hadn't found anything. Keep in mind, I used to be a Marine. I'm trained to spot even the most subtle of movements. By 1 in the morning, I was about ready to turn back and head to the farm. It was about that point I had heard the deepest grumble and growl I have ever heard. I turned around. The second I did, I was flat on my back, the wind knocked out of me, struggling to breathe. Something had jumped me and immediately vanished all in a span of a second. I got up, still struggling to catch my breath when I heard this growling again. I had just caught my breath when I saw these massive eyes staring at me from deeper in the woods. This behemoth of a beast lurched, and I let loose with my Desert Eagle. I let out 3 rounds, 2 to the chest and 1 to the head, of whatever this thing was before turning and hauling butt out of the woods. I have never run so quickly in my entire lifetime. Standing at the tree line, backing away now, slowly as I exited the woods, I held my gun up when I saw the glow of this thing's eyes and the glint of its teeth in the moonlight. It let out the deep growl and snarled at me before slowly pulling back into the woods again. It was a couple of minutes later, when it didn't seem to give any real chase, that I realized I was shaking uncontrollably and I holstered my weapon. I watched that area like a hawk for the rest of the night. Things remained quiet and nothing else happened. The next morning I talked to the farmer and explained to him what I had encountered. The man checked the cameras and what he saw chilled me to the bone. This thing had been following me the entire time I was in the woods. I will tell you now, prior to it letting me know it was there, and it getting aggressive, I didn't hear a single sound in those woods. The night vision didn't really give a proper picture of the thing. I can tell you this though, that this thing was massive. I've never seen a creature so big in my life. It also was disturbingly fast and quiet. I asked the farmer what he thought this could be, but he was as lost as I was. I explained to him the thing never seemed to leave the woods, but it was quickly decided that it wasn't safe anywhere in that area. He explained, however, that a few of his sheep had gone missing in the night, so he suspected it must leave the woods just long enough to feed. I've been in contact with the farmer since, and he's described that from time to time some of his animals would go missing, but he's never had a direct encounter with whatever this beast is. He paid me in full, and I've never gone back to that area since. It's not really unusual as we go all over, but I can say with certainty that I would like to never go back there again, even if he paid me 10 times the amount he paid me for that job. As I said before, I was a Marine, and after I got into private security, I'm not easily shaken, and I'm not easily unnerved. But that night, that job, I found fear. I hope to never come across anything like that ever again. I won't say my name. I'll just say I'm 32 and a male. I'm a facilities guy for Parks and Rec, and I work nights. Now, facilities guy is just another way of saying I'm the maintenance man. I do a lot of cleaning and any pickup needed. When you work night shift, you have to go around and quickly clean everything and host any nighttime events, as well as cover all facilities in the area before your shift ends around midnight in my case. One night I had what you would call a typical work night. Typical work nights, as I call them, are the ones where you don't have any events going on, so you basically just go from facility to facility, making sure upkeep is done and doing things like taking out the trash, replacing said trash bags, and making sure there is no vandalism, etc. Being a lot of our facilities are in and around parks, we get a lot of transients and homeless. The homeless are fine and normally very understanding individuals. If I need them to move on or even just further away from my facility, they are normally very understanding and will comply at the very least until I move to the next facility. I'm a nice guy, and I don't like to give people too hard of a time, as I've been homeless and I know what it's like. That said, the transients are almost always a horrible interaction. Transients generally choose to live homeless on purpose and are often addicted to drugs or will commit crimes because they can, basically. They are uncooperative 99.9% of the time, and since most of the time they are just released immediately, if they are arrested at all, they have no qualms about causing a scene or stabbing you if it's in their interest or they simply wish to. So, needless to say, I have to be careful. Transients aren't usually a big concern until I get to the last facility of the night. That facility is in our highest crime neighborhood in the city I work. Now for the record, I think it's great to have a facility like this in a neighborhood like this because it helps keep kids from getting into gangs and such like that, which are very prevalent in this neighborhood. That said, working the nights in an area like this can go, if lucky, perfectly well, and quietly, or be a complete horror show. Now, generally, the gangs in the area won't mess with you if you aren't in their business, just mind your own business, keep walking, keep your head down, and you'll be fine. A lot of people I've come across while working my shift will even be understanding of the fact that I'm just doing my job as well. I'm not defending gangs by any means, but I am also not saying that they're bad, I am saying most of the ones in my neighborhood go by, and as long as you stay out of their business, they'll stay out of yours. Anyway, on this night, I was wrapping up my cleanup, and was pretty stoked as I had the next 2 nights off. It was around this time I was preparing to do my last check of the facility, and clock out and go home. As I was making my rounds, I hear a sudden noise from upstairs. When I say upstairs, I'm referring to an attic area where a lot of ventilation systems are. In order to access it, you need to pull down an attic, which creates steps, and then you'll need to climb a ridiculously tall ladder and hang off of one with one hand to push a fairly heavy door open so you can climb up to the attic area of the facility. It's not an easy place to access, but you can do so if you know what you're doing and no one is around to see you do it. I don't hear anything for a minute or so when I'm comfortable again, I begin turning off the lights. It is around this time I hear another loud bang from above me. Curious, I open the front door and then shut it again, but I don't exit. I've shut the lights off and I'm waiting around now. It is only now I start hearing stomping. I'm a little on edge as it becomes more and more apparent that someone or something is clearly camping out in the attic area. I thought about calling the cops at first, but we've had an issue with raccoons and such finding their way into the building before, and the last time we called the cops to check on something like this, it turned out it was just bats. After just a couple of more minutes of listening, I decided to take a flashlight and check the area myself. Now the attic stairs are going to make a loud enough noise on their own, but if somebody knows that I'm coming, they can't really go anywhere. As such, I also bring my knife with me just in case. I climb up and get to the ladder and climb into the attic area itself. I shut the door behind me to make sure I don't fall back through this large drop. The moment the door shuts, I notice all I can hear is my breathing and some of the ventilation and such. I'm slowly scanning the area with my flashlight and keeping my knife close by my other hand. As I look around, I notice a raccoon and some babies. At this point, I breathe a huge sigh of relief and prepare to head out. I figure I'll leave a note about the raccoons and the babies and they'll be able to let animal control handle it in the morning. I'm just about to head back toward the door when I hear a shifting sound. I turned around, and suddenly, this older bearded guy lurches at me and knocks me on my butt. I lose my flashlight and my knife and decide to feel around. I tried to find where my knife went. It is around that time I feel something hard hit the back of my head. I feel dizzy, and when I feel something hit me in my right side, between my ribs. Shortly after this I feel it exit and enter me several more times before I'm turned and beaten in the face. I'm dizzy and thinking to myself, I'm clocked out and no one is going to know I'm up here, and I'm gonna die. I try to fight back with what strength I had, with any adrenaline that I could afford, as the man tries to stab me with an already bloody knife in the chest. I manage to stop him, and struggling and quite dizzy. After some rolling around, I am able to knock his head into a board and scramble to get up again. I grab my flashlight and see my own knife, which I scramble toward and feel a sharp object stabbing me in the back of my right leg. I'm hurting, but I am also PO'd at this point. So I get to my knife. I turn around just in time to stab this guy. I wind up pushing my knife into the side of his head, but out of shock, I let go. The man falls over and seems out of it, complaining about his head. I get my phone out and call the police. The last thing I remember was saying something to 911, and the next thing I know, I'm awake in a hospital and there's the sweetest nurse I've ever had, looking at me and asking me how I'm feeling. I told her I'm not sure. Then I was flooded with memories of what I had just experienced, and I started freaking out. She calmed me down and reassured me that I'm going to be okay and that I'm safe now. The police were there and an officer asked me everything about what happened. I explained what had happened, and he took the story down and reassured me that the man in question would be spending a time in jail. A long time, that is. I remember being in shock at the fact that the man was alive. I asked how the man was doing, mostly out of reaction to my shock. The cop said he'd been, alive, but that's all he could say about it. I was out of work for quite a while after that. It was all paid leave until I could recover. I'm still a facilities guy today, but I've switched to a day shift and am much more comfortable with my job again. The nurse I'd met is my wife now as well. We've been together for about 5 years now, and I can't help but laugh at the morbid irony of it all. I mean, what I experienced was easily the worst experience in my life. That said, had I not experienced it, I never would have met my wife. It's funny how life works. That said, I never want to experience anything like that ever again. The homeless guy who attacked me is in prison for 40 years, and at his age, that likely means life. I'm grateful to be alive today, and I'll never take another day of my life for granted. I've been working the night shift for as long as I can remember. I do security for older, abandoned places. Usually it's nothing too crazy. Sometimes I'll have to run off a homeless person or two, but that's generally about it. That was until the summer of 2014. I live in Texas. We don't generally put up with anyone's antics. There's a reason they tell you don't mess with Texas. Anyway, I say this to tell you, I take that sort of thing to heart in many ways. It is a part of my own personality. I don't scare easily, and I sure as hell don't back down. Things in my story start off rather subtly. The odd sound here and a weird movement there. It was nothing crazy at first, and considering I had been on my job for a good 5 years at this point, I thought maybe someone was messing with me or it was just rodents or something like that. It was probably about mid-July when things began to really escalate. I was walking around this old office building. The places I watch over were fairly large, and so I didn't often get bored, as while I would take things at my own pace, the places were large enough that truly searching them meant the whole night was over before I knew it. So, as I said, I was waltzing my way through the building, scanning around with my flashlight and half zoning out when I heard a noise in a room across the hall. The noise was a grinding noise, like when you drag those chairs across the floor in a classroom. You probably know the ones. You have those weird feet, and they make a grating and aggravating noise. Well, I entered the room the sound came from, and as I did, I noticed the sound is extremely easy to hear at this point. I announced myself thinking someone was being stupid or maybe just wanting to be caught or something. Still, the noise continues, and at this point, it's constant back and forth like someone is running the feet of the chair. Anyway, I was annoyed, and wanting the noise to stop, so I rushed around the corner of some cubicles and yelled at whoever is back there needs to leave. As I round the corner, however, the noise stops, and the chair is just sitting there, abandoned. Thinking someone went around the other side, as that was the only way out, I went over there. I try to cut them off and get to the door. As I'm rounding the corner, I hear a loud slam. I turn around and realize the chair had been thrown at me and just missed my head. Pissed off at this point and a bit confused, I searched the room high and low. I found no one, nowhere. I checked every nook and every cranny, and no one left back out the door. I don't know what that was. I know this because the door is rather heavy and old, so it creaks and makes a fair amount of noise. While this was strange, I simply wrote up a report and went on about my night. I didn't have much of an explanation. It certainly was odd, but I've always been a super rational individual, and I'm not one to overthink these things. I wasn't sure how to get out of the room, but in my head, the only thought was someone had to have obviously found a way out. I hadn't considered anything paranormal. The rest of the night went by fairly uneventfully, and I went home soon after. A couple of weeks later, near the beginning of August, I was working some overtime, a rare occurrence, when I heard distinct and heavy footsteps down the hallway. I followed these footsteps to the end of the hallway when suddenly they were behind me and on the other end of the hallway. A tad thrown by this, I decided to follow the footsteps back when it happened again. At this point, I believed maybe a couple of homeless people or even some kids were messing around with me, and thought it would be funny to make loud noises down on each end of the hall. Again, I'm a rational individual, so if it could be explained in some rational way in my head, it was as good as solved. I walk toward the end of the hallway and laugh and call out. I tell the people messing with me that I'll let them off if they just get out of here, as they were doing was actually amusing me and livened up my night a bit. There's silence for a moment, and I'm about to walk off when I hear this ungodly yelling. It sounds inhuman, and is so loud I feel myself jump out of my skin for a moment before I bring myself down to reality. This is when I hear a sudden barrage of steps coming my way loudly and quickly. I turn and rush down the hallway, and once again, the ungodly call yells at me again. This time, though, I swear I hear my name in the sound. Deciding I might be freaking out over nothing, I pause for a brief rest and try to rationally decipher in my mind what had just happened. The noise had faded and it appears I'm safe at the moment, so after a good 10 to 15 minutes of talking myself down, I laugh at myself and decide it is time to go back and check things out. I head back down the hallway slowly and scan things. The air has a heaviness to it, and I feel myself getting a headache as I push further down the hall. There's an almost humming sound going through my head now, and I believe I'm beginning to see something. I see the light shifting in the halls, and that's confusing, and there hasn't been any power to these buildings for a while. Then, it's dark again, and I swear I can hear my name again. It's being whispered, and while definitely shaken by everything, I shout angrily that whoever is messing with me needs to leave now. See, I might be afraid, but there is a limit at which point I go from being scared to pissed off. If someone was somehow pulling a prank, something I was beginning to believe less and less as things happened, I was fed up with it, and they needed to leave. Then, all at once, the air grew lighter again, and the humming and whispers simply just stopped. I filed a report. I'll admit, I was pretty non-specific as to what I witnessed, as I didn't know for sure myself what was happening, and I didn't want to put my job in jeopardy by sounding like a loon. The remainder of the night was quiet, and I didn't have any problems again until a couple of months later in early October. It was around the 1st or 2nd of the month when I came into work in a fairly great mood. I'd met someone over the past couple of months and she was a wonderful woman. We're married now. Excited to go see her after my shift, I was pretty light on my feet and chipper in my mood as I walked the halls of the buildings. That is when I heard the all too familiar noise. It was an inhuman screaming, almost a growling sound. Confused and annoyed at this point, I headed through the building I was in as swiftly as possible. Nothing was going to ruin my mood tonight, I thought to myself. As I'm searching, I hear the sound again, but this time it resonates through the hallway toward me. Whatever was doing this was loud enough I could hear it through the entire building. Deciding I should seriously look into this, I head a bit more quickly, peeking around corners and searching places I don't normally check. I'm not finding anything when I hear a very distinct screaming. It sounds like a woman. I head toward the sound of that screaming, and that's when I find a trail of blood. I call the cops immediately as I head inside. I'm trying to explain everything I hear to them, but that's when I find a woman, or what's left of her, ripped into and bleeding all over the place. I'm in shock as I'm explaining to the 911 dispatcher where I'm at and what I am seeing. That's when I hear the growl again, and I can feel my body being overtaken by goosebumps. I've never, in my entire life, felt chills like this. There's a scratching sound coming from down the hall, and I'm asking this poor woman who clearly can't say anything, what the hell is going on? She is just coughing up blood and bleeding all over the place. As I continue to hear this thing come down the hall, I am freaking out, and that's when I see the flashing lights from outside. I scream with all my lungs, "Help! Help! We're in here!" Soon after that, the air grew less heavy again and the paramedics and cops arrived. I'm crying, holding this poor woman who looks like she'd been mauled by a bear or something. I'm confused and don't really know how to explain that. I don't know how to explain what I had heard or how this woman was even here, bleeding to death in my arms. I'm taken out, the woman is taken too, and I try my best to explain what I knew. The woman died from the wounds she had and loss of blood. I don't know how to explain this thing that is down there, but I was moved after some time off to a single building to watch, in a much more populated area. I'm fairly certain the police seemed to think the woman was mauled by a rabid dog or something. That was the word anyway. I, however, do not believe for a second that this poor woman died at the hands of an animal. At least, not some rabid dog. There was something in that place, and I was never more sure of this fact until that night. I still work nights now, and thankfully things are more peaceful. I've never gone back to those buildings, and I don't ever plan to. This is the one time in my life I can say, I don't wish to know what was hiding in those buildings, and I don't wish to know the explanation behind what happened. Whatever it was, I don't believe it was natural or human. Thanks for reading my story. You can call me Maddie, as I won't share my real name. I was a 911 dispatch worker on a night shift for my area. I won't share my area as I don't feel comfortable doing so. That said, anyone working 911 dispatch on any shift can tell you it's a tough job. It's very mentally and emotionally taxing, as it's your responsibility to make sure someone get the help they need as soon as possible. But some of the things you hear on the other end of the line, well, they're just horrific. We go through a fair amount of training to deal with these things, and there's always an open door if we need more help dealing with things mentally or emotionally with the trials of the job at hand. Anyway, my story revolves around several strange calls I got over the course of several nights, and the strange occurrences that happened soon after. The first night I got one of these calls was in December. It was during most kids' holiday. One of the first things we ask people to give us when we receive a call is the address that they are at. It's a vitally important bit of information, as unless you are calling from a landline, we don't usually know the specific address you are calling from. This is changing as tech changes, but at the time I was doing this, if you were calling from a cell phone, we could trace within the general area in most cases, but we often couldn't get an exact address. Also, depending on how many cell towers were in the area, if you're in a rural area and you just have poor signal, it can make our job that much harder. Anyway, I get a call and it's a man who simply says, "Help," in a groggy sounding voice, and the line just dies after that. As I said before, if it's a landline, we'd have an address immediately, but this is what makes the call stranger. I have no information appearing at all as to the location of this call. There's generally some form of information, but I can't get anything off of this. Thrown off by this, I inform my supervisor of what just happened. We talk for quite a bit and she tells me she will look into it if I get another call like this, and just to let her know if it happens again. I'm sure she was worried. Maybe there was something wrong with the system or my equipment. I continue through the night and everything is working smoothly, it seems. At this point, that one strange call has been pushed to the back of my mind and was almost forgotten. At about 6 in the morning, I'm ready to head home. That's when I get the last call of my night. It's that same groggy voice, and it simply says, "Help," before hanging up. Once again, there's no caller information or anything to work with. I talk to my supervisor, who tells me to get home and get some rest, and she'll look into the issue more thoroughly. I go home and crash immediately. The next night, I'm back at it again. I asked my supervisor if she ever figured out what was going on with those calls. She explained that she hadn't, but once again, if I got another one, just signal her and she'd come and check it out. I believe she figured it was a prank of some kind, but she wasn't allowed to voice it out loud, as we were supposed to take every call seriously, and she seemed to be regardless of what she might have been thinking. It's about 11 at night, and when I get another call, and judging from the lack of data on my computer, I know immediately it's the guy. I signal for my supervisor, who quickly rushes over and answers the call herself. This time there is nothing on the other end. No voice, just breathing. The line then hangs up. Still, there is no information at all. Weirded out, my supervisor has me work on a different computer and system just to see if that changes anything, or if somehow our own equipment is glitching. It's 2 in the morning, and when we got another call from this man. Once again, there's no information. My supervisor tries to inform whoever is on the other end that if this is a prank call, they will be charged. There is silence, and the line hangs up again. My supervisor is equal parts confused and also angry, and I'm just at a loss. That said, the remainder of the year goes by without any more calls. It's shortly after New Year's when we get the mysterious call again. I answer and signal for my supervisor. The voice on the other end sounds like some groggy man, the same one from before, and he simply says, "Why didn't you help me?" This time, the caller ID turns up, and the call, it was coming from inside our own building. I remember the shock on my supervisor's face, and I remember being completely confused. My supervisor informs me she is going to search the building and asks that I keep doing my job. I agree to do so, but inside I just have this bad feeling. Nothing is right about these calls. I reluctantly get back to work and try not to overthink the calls I got. It's about 4 in the morning when I receive another call. It, once again, is coming from the building. It's the man, but he sounds happier. The words he says next put chills down my spine. "She's mine now." The line hangs up. It is around this time I notice my supervisor hasn't responded to my signaling and haven't seen her since she was going to search the building. Trying to be rational and assuming she's probably talking with police or trying to get things handled elsewhere in the building, I try to continue my job till my shift ends. The second I'm off shift, I see the daytime supervisor and I ask him if he's seen or heard from the night shift supervisor. He said no, and I began to get this sinking feeling. I asked him to search the building for her, as the last that I'd heard from her, she was looking into a strange calls we were getting from the building itself. He said sure thing, and I made him swear he'd search the building. I then went home and tried to get some sleep. It was shortly after I got home that I got a call from the daytime supervisor. He informed me that he'd found the night shift supervisor hanging in the basement level of the building. It appeared to be a suicide. I remember being freaked out and trying to explain that there was no way it was a suicide. There was no way. I remember being questioned about everything that had happened, and I remember the only answer I was ever given after it was all said and done was that my supervisor's death was a suicide. It was ruled a suicide and everything pointed to a suicide. I still don't believe it was a suicide, and for a few months after this took place, I'd get calls at varying times of the night on my personal cell, when off duty with that man's voice. He'd just laugh, every time, and that laugh is etched into my memory eternally. I quit my job and moved a few months later. I no longer work in any sort of high-stress job. In fact, I work from home now. I haven't received another call since moving. I'm a nighttime security guy who watches over a business. I won't identify the business or my employers, as to do so would result in the loss of my job. Anyway, I'll keep this as brief as possible. My job really isn't that hard.
I basically stare at cameras, and if anything seems off, I check the area. It's really that simple, but the nature of where I work makes it very important. So, I've been at this place for 15 years now, and around my 5th year is when things got really odd. I'm not sure what changed, to be honest. There's no dark history behind the land or the buildings I work in, or anything that should make it obvious things would happen. Still, I was working on Saturday night roughly 10 years ago when the first of the activity started. It wasn't much. I was working in an office, examining different areas when I saw a door open. It kind of just cracked open like someone had turned the latch and lightly pushed the door ajar. I watched closely as the door shut again, and I saw no one. Fearing a security breach of some sort, I made note of the room and number and floor and headed to check it out. When I arrived, I found the door hovering open. I say hovering open as the door will close if you don't hold it open. It's made to do so, and also to lock behind you as it shuts. I called out, asking if anyone was there, and stated my name and job to them. I received no response, and so I took my flashlight and headed inside the door. Turning the lights on, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. The door shut normally behind me, and it didn't seem like anything was propping the door open or that anything in the room had even been touched. After thoroughly searching the room and then testing the door several times, I went back to my security room at a loss for what had happened. I wrote a report and noted it. I didn't find anyone or anything that would have caused the strange happenings. A week goes by and it's another Saturday night. It's probably about 1 in the morning when I notice someone running through the hallways. I follow them in the cameras until I notice they are headed my way. Right about the time they hit the camera outside my room, there is a power surge, quickly followed by a pounding on the door. The surge ended, and no one is on any of my cameras. I look outside immediately and search up and down the hallways. I found no one around though. At about 3 in the morning, I head back into my security room. I begin writing up another report and somewhat worried my supervisor is going to think I'm some sort of nut with the reports I'm writing. The remainder of the night is fairly relaxed. I file my report and go home for much needed sleep. About 3 months later, possibly, I'm chilling and doing my job when I hear giggling from outside my door. Okay, I think. Strange, but nothing life-threatening. So I check my cameras. Once again, there doesn't appear to be anyone around, but I can very clearly hear distinct giggling, and I could still hear it as if it's right there. Deciding I'd be better just to open the door and look around, I can still hear the giggling, but now it's further down the hall. I walk forward and check the corners before proceeding onward. Every time I seem to turn a corner, the giggling is magically on the other end of the hallway. This is weird, but again, I don't feel threatened and I need some entertainment, so I decide to keep following the giggling. I spend the next hour following the sound in circles and all over different floors. Eventually, it stops. I find myself once again standing in front of the security room. I head inside and check the footage, but it just shows me walking around and looking as though I'm doing my rounds. As such, I decide not to waste my time with the report as nothing weird was caught on camera. These are just a few experiences I've had while on the job. There are plenty of other strange happenings and they still happen today. I'm not sure what is wandering our facility, but I'm not sure it can be naturally explained, and I do not believe that it is in any way threatening. I've actually grown to somewhat fond of our games of cat and mouse. It makes my shift a lot more exciting, and I think it's kind of fun to investigate the odd sounds and weird happenings around the place at night. Who knows, maybe one night I'll finally see something that explains everything happening, but if I never do, I'll be happy knowing I've made an unseen friend, and we've had many fun nights hanging out in a way. My name is Ricky, and I'm a carny. It's a life of travel, and a life I've always loved. Still, nights have another aura about them. Depending on the location, things can get weird, and while my life is generally weird, there are some places I always dread going. My story takes place in the Midwest, a truly scary place indeed. It was fair time, and we would often spend a week here and go and spend another week there. These sorts of things are huge events, and I'm grateful to be able to bring joy to the kids and families who enjoy the rides we build and break down so often. All that aside, this place was something else. It wasn't subtle about it either. The very first night of the fair, and I'm working the Ferris wheel, when I hear this loud screaming. I see some of our crew rush over and check on the screaming. It isn't long before we all understand why the screaming happened. There's a dead kid in the House of Mirrors, heart ripped from their body in big old bloody footprints that seem to lead to the mirrors, then simply vanish. Needless to say, the fair was shut down quickly the remainder of the night, and the police were very intensely questioning all of us who worked the fair. Not a great opening night to the fair, to say the least. Well, we answer their questions and explain how we are just perplexed as they are. The smug nature of the local police doesn't help the situation either. They are convinced one of our own murdered the kid, and we have every moment now to fess up. After much arguing and no way to prove any of us had anything to do with the murder of this poor child, we are basically blamed for everything by the police in the town. Needless to say, we weren't extremely busy that week. In fact, all the business we got seemed to be from edgy teens who thought going to the murder fair would be exciting. I was messed up, but business is business, and we took what we could get, and all things considered, it was pretty much okay. It was the final night of the quote-unquote murder fair, as we were now dubbed, when some of the teens went into the Hall of Mirrors. There was laughter and shouting which drew our attention at first. I had someone take over my Ferris wheel work, not that anyone was on the thing at the time anyway, and I went into the Hall of Mirrors just to be sure that everything was fine. I just knew they weren't going to be fine. A few seconds after entering, I hear this screaming, and that's when I see the teens come stampeding out. I ask them if they're alright, and they're shaking and saying no. I ask them what happened, and they tell me they saw this female clown inside one of the mirrors. She just stared at them, smiling. The kids were very descriptive about this, and mentioned how her teeth were sharp and covered in blood. I smiled and asked them who came up with the joke. The looks on their faces said it wasn't a joke. I told them I'd go in and check it out, and to stay out of the Hall of Mirrors in the future. I looked high and low and didn't find anything at first. It was about the time I decided to head back that I was confronted with the most grotesque and freaky looking clown I've ever seen in my entire life. I know how crazy it sounds, and all I could say is I literally peed myself and thought I was going to die. There was this 6 or 7 foot female clown with a big grin on her face, and a large, what looked like knife or something in her hand. She just kept laughing at me before turning and walking off. I was thoroughly confused, and as I attempted to follow her, she turned the corner. The problem being, the corner led to a mirror. I looked in the mirror and saw no one. Freaked out, I marked the mirror before leaving the halls completely. I remember marking a big X on the thing and heading out to talk to the other carnies. Everyone asked if I was okay, and I just told them no, and that in the morning we needed to take the mirror I marked out and destroy the thing and replace the mirror in the next town. I wasn't asked much about it after that, and the first thing we did that morning was destroy the mirror. The next town we hit went smoothly, though word had gotten around about the murder fair, and we did have fewer children present. Our final stop in the Midwest was where things came to a head, so to speak. The business was booming and things were going well. We were having record sales and attendance as people have moved past the whole murder fair being scary and moved into a fascination with the idea. Rumors about the kid who never made it out, and while it was no doubt really messed up, it was the citizens who did this, not us. We didn't market our fair as such. To be honest, we had hoped people would just forget about it. That wasn't going to happen now though, and it was less likely to happen after this night I'm about to speak of. A kid went into the Hall of Mirrors alone. It wasn't long before his mom flipped out, understandably so, and began screaming at us that her son went in, but he hadn't come out in 15 minutes. It got to the point to where she was harassing other customers. In an attempt to calm the woman, I offered to go with her to look for her son, I explained the only ways out were watch closely, and I'd walk with her and we'd finally probably find her lost son. This wound up being a mistake. Her son wasn't lost, the kid was clearly missing, and how that was so much a mystery as the fact that several people had been in and out of the place and didn't notice a thing. Kids don't just vanish. The cops were called and again we were questioned. We were all but run out of town after that. A few years after this all happened and once things settled down a bit, we went ahead and attempted to run a carnival around the area again. We avoided certain towns, but we were welcomed in the ones we went to. We completely abandoned having a house of mirrors and we never had a problem after that. I don't know what happened to make that house of mirrors how it was. Perhaps we were cursed. I'm honestly not sure, but we sold that section of our fair to a private purchaser who thought its history was odd and curious. I sometimes wonder what they use it for if that clown still roams its halls. I'm a private eye, and as such I work a lot of late night shifts. People sin the most at night, I always say. It's easier to catch most off guard than to, in my opinion. Now, my work typically takes me all over, but much of my work involves catching cheaters in the act. The kind of thing is generally easy to do and kind of boring. So, to put it frankly, I was more than a little excited when I was asked to look for someone's missing daughter. I was told to be discreet and I was paid up front. I didn't even have to ask, and that's something I generally have to fight with people. Usually, I ask for half immediately to pay the bills and half when the jobs are done. So I guess my alarm bell should have gone off when the client paid all of it up front. No questions asked. Still, I'll admit, I was so relieved by how prompt and upfront they were about the cost that I wasn't about to argue, and I made their case my priority. I was told that the client believed their daughter may have run away. Still, the city is a dangerous place to be running free for anyone, let alone a kid. The girl was supposedly 15 and I figured I'd start my search asking around the city through my contacts if they seen the girl. I got a big fat no from most of my contacts. But then I got a message about a girl that had been seen matching this girl's description 30 miles outside of the city. This had me concerned, and after doing some digging, I was eventually led to a farm. Now, I went here after receiving a tip about the girl. Looking back now though, I wish I hadn't gone there at all. When I first inspected the place, it was by daylight. There were all the usual, unexpected private property signs, and after thinking on it, I decided I was going to approach the owners of the farm. Part of me didn't want to, but I was a smooth enough talker. I mainly wanted to get a vibe of the place anyway. I could have done this on my own, under cover of darkness, but I wanted to make the owners feel comfortable, and no matter the story they gave me, I was going to check the place out anyway later on. I figured, if nothing else, I'd get an idea of the lay of the land. So cautiously I announced myself, and that's when a tall man approached me. He looked to be 6'4" and of stout build. The man spoke to me in a deep voice and basically asked what the hell I was doing near the farm. I explained I was looking for someone and I was wondering if they'd seen her around. After showing a photo of the girl, I got a very firm no. I asked if anyone else lived on the farm and perhaps I could show them the photo. After a very tense silence, the man opened the gate and insisted I come in. I cautiously walked ahead of this guy, being certain I was going to be murdered and never heard from again. As I walked through, I examined the area. It was pretty open, but there was something that caught my attention. It looked like a barn off in the distance. I diverted my attention straight ahead once more to see an old house. We'd walked some distance when two women come out. One was a heavier set one, and the other was quite the opposite. I have nothing against anyone who's overweight, as I have a bit of a belly myself. But the stark contrast was just something I noticed. A shorter man came out and greeted me and asked what it was I needed. I explained to the man I'd been looking for a young girl that had recently been near the area, and I was wondering if they had seen her. The man took a close look at the photo and said he hadn't, that he was off and busy working the farm, at which point he'd handed the photo to his wife. She shook her head before turning to their daughter and asked if she had seen the girl. She looked closely and shook her head, saying she hadn't, but she'd keep an eye out in case anything was happening around the farm. I then took the photo and told the family thank you, and said I'd be on my way. I even gave them a card to call in the event they saw her. I soon left the farm, escorted by my giant friend on the way out. I quickly drove away after that, but not too far, as I basically took a nap in my car and waited for the night to fall. It wasn't long before my alarm went off and I realized it was 9 at night. I slowly drove my car toward the farm and drove by it as I looked for a decent area to ditch my car. When I found one, I parked my car, shut it off, and ran back to the farm. The vibe of the place was so much different at night. I was sure that this was part of my imagination, and the creepy look of the place at night was just me being nervous. Still, I pressed forward, hopping the fence as I did, and slowly working my way toward the house. There were no lights on, and all appeared silent when I approached. I peeked inside the windows and realized there was no activity, and so I looked around the area. Finding nothing in the yard, I examined a nearby shed. At first, all seemed well. But as I dug further, I noticed some photos. The photos were in a bag titled Family. Looking through them, they seemed innocent enough. That said, something didn't sit entirely right with me. The photos were all of women who looked to be in their teens, smiles on their faces, and wearing a strange gown made out of burlap sack. On top of that, the smiles they wore didn't seem entirely genuine. It looked more than a little forced. Examining these photos just showing the girls hanging out and doing farm work and eating watermelon, I attempted to make a call out to the contact after taking a photo of the photos. I was hoping to see if any of these girls were missing. Naturally, I had no signal out there though, and so I left the shed quietly and headed down the lane toward the fence and back to my car. Once there, I sent a text to one of my friends and asked about these girls. The person said they'd do some digging and get back to me, so I waited for a bit and eventually was told none of them had been missing. Confused, I told them thank you and decided I'd get something to eat and get some sleep as daylight was fast approaching and I wouldn't be able to get anything done then. The day came and went, and I was awoken by my alarm at about 7. There was still light out, but I wanted to get some food in me and get ready for a second night out, searching the premises. At 10, I headed back onto the farm. Once I had finished eating, and it was about 9, I had headed back to my hiding spot and waited. At 10, I headed back onto the farm. I was quiet, and I once again checked the house and made sure there was no activity. After I realized everything was quiet, I decided I wanted to check the barn in the distance. The area was open, and I couldn't help but feel afraid that someone would see me as I approached the barn itself. That was the least of my worries though, as I would soon realize upon approaching the barn was lit up. There were chains all over the doors, and as I peeked through the slit in the doors, I could see another door, partially covered by hay with a padlock and something else on it. Listening more closely now, I could hear screams. Screams for help. I immediately inspected the outside of the barn and kept a close eye on things as I heard movement inside the barn. Listening more closely from the back of the barn, I could hear chanting. I didn't understand the language, but I knew someone was in there. Knowing I wouldn't have signal and decided it's best to report things to police from here, I made my way back across the field. But midway across the field I heard a gunshot and felt a great deal of pain in my right arm. I couldn't help but cry out in pain as it was so sudden and immense. I looked closely at my arm and kept my head quite low this time as I did so. I heard another shot fire off and I felt a bullet whiz through my hair and narrowly miss my skull. I then heard an all too familiar loud voice shouting expletives and telling me I'm trespassing on private property. Out of options and unsure what to do, I called out stating who I was and informing them that if I wasn't out here in the next few minutes, the police would be raiding the place. This was a desperate lie, and the reality sank in all too quickly that I might not make it out of this place alive when the voice came back laughing and telling me they enjoyed the taste of bacon. It was at this moment I knew I was out of options and was screwed if I didn't start moving, and fast. I got up and ran, keeping no straight lines or particular patterns. I kept thinking I'd likely be dead any second, but as I made it to the fence and threw myself over, there wasn't another shot fired at all. Perhaps he bought my bluff, perhaps not, but I didn't wait around to find out as I was desperately hobbled to the hiding spot my car was in before driving as best as I could to the nearest gas station and calling 911. I explained the situation and who I was, and they mentioned that they would have authorities out there immediately. I told them I'd come out once I saw the lights, and in the meantime, I'd be in a spot near the farm. I told the authorities that they should be careful. I told them that they're very dangerous. I told them to bring guns, as these people didn't seem like they cared at all whether the cops showed or not. It wasn't long before I was back at my spot and the police were already on the scene. I was checked out by a paramedic and questioned. I told them I was fine, but I wanted to be sure the girl I was looking for wasn't there. The police spent the remainder of the night searching the farm, only to find it abandoned. The family wasn't there, and upon breaking the padlock on the barn door, what they found inside were crazy. They found a bunch of photos, but no bodies. The entire area was searched thoroughly, and the clothes of the girl I was searching for were found in the house, but there was no sign of the girl outside of this or the family. It looked like the family had been keeping many girls underneath the farm, but no one ever found them. Some skeletons were found on the property later on, but I never found the girl. I returned the payment I received from the family to them, but they told me to keep it anyway as a thanks for at least finding where she was. To my knowledge, this family hasn't seen or heard from her since.
I was a nighttime security guard at a mall. For privacy reasons, I won't say which one. The job is usually extremely boring. Quite often, I just patrol, write reports of what I've been doing, and patrol some more. If things get really exciting, I might get lucky and find a few kids loitering and get to make up some fake story about the bad things that are going to happen to them if they continue to loiter. It's fun and usually scares them away, as they're ignorant to the fact that I'm not going to arrest them, nor am I even able to. Sometimes, I don't even go that route and I straight tell them about some horrible things that I've seen. Teenagers are more gullible than they like to admit in my experience. It used to be we'd joke around about something creeping around the mall. Now though, it seems like an all too real thing. There's a story behind it all, and if you'd be kind enough to listen, I'll happily tell it. I've been doing my job for about 5 years now, though I no longer work night shift. It hasn't been the most exciting thing in the world, which I'm grateful for, but that's what I love about it. It always felt safe and chill. This was until about my second year working as a nighttime security guard. As I said, it's usually very safe and a chill job. It was the weekend before 4th of July, and I was roaming the mall parking lots and grounds, looking for anything suspicious, but mostly I was just zoning out and killing time till morning when my shift ended. It was while driving around the back of the mall that I heard some rattling. I looked in the general direction of the sound and didn't see anything. My first thought was maybe it was an animal, but then it happened again. I quickly drove over to the back entrance of the mall and watched it closely. I was intrigued, but I wasn't expecting much. Still, I thought it'd be a nice change to the normal lull of interesting, that is, night shift security at malls. I should mention, despite how much I clown on my job, I do love it. I'm just being honest in the fact that it's generally a slower job. Anyway, I'm scanning the area, flashlight out, and I can see no sign of animal life. I'm just about to pull away when I hear the noise again. I immediately park my truck and get out. This time the noise hasn't stopped. In fact, it's going, and it appears to be at the mall doors. It looks like the mall doors are shaking, like someone is trying to get in or out. It was weird at first, because it was just a couple of rows of doors, but as it went on, I noticed all the doors were now rattling. I felt weird, but I knew I had to do my job, and I was beyond curious at this point, so I unlocked all the mall doors and headed inside, making sure to lock the door behind me, of course. The strange thing was, the noise stopped as I was doing this, and while entering I saw no one around that would be pounding on the doors and shaking them in any way. Still, being I was the night security guard, I decided to start patrolling inside the mall itself. I searched all the bathrooms, every nook and cranny, everything. Still, I found no one around.
Perplexed, but ready to write it off as just lack of sleep, I began heading toward the entrance once again. As I'm getting to the door and about to unlock it, I hear the most disturbing scream coming from deeper within the mall. It wasn't just one scream, though. It was 3 distinct screams and then silence. I debated calling the police at this point, but also figured I needed to check the area again before doing so. I basically didn't want to call the police out to find out that I was somehow hallucinating something in my mind, or maybe my mind was just playing tricks on me. I slowly walked deeper into the mall once again, flashlight in hand. I know I should probably run, but if you heard this scream and realized you were only armed with a baton and some mace, you'd be a lot more hesitant as well. Once again, I searched the mall, but I found no one. I laughed at myself and told myself to chill before taking a seat in the food court. It was while looking around and trying to relax I heard a rattling sound. I stood up and panned my flashlight to find the trash can shaking before tipping on its side. I went over to the trash can and picked it up. I wasn't about to waste my time cleaning the trash itself. I'm sorry, they don't pay me to be a facilities guy. I'm just security and I don't have the tools needed to clean the mess up anyway. I once again debated calling the police, but then I thought, what am I going to say? Some invisible force is screaming and knocking trash cans over? Please send the ghost hunters or something? I laughed at that thought, but I was bothered by what I had just seen. Was the thing I witnessed caused by a ghost? If there was a ghost in the facility, how exactly was I supposed to deal with that, and how would I fit that into a report? If this quote-unquote ghost kept making a mess, how would I keep my job seeing as I would be blamed for it, or at the very least questioned about what was going on at night? Answering with I don't know or I think it might be a ghost wouldn't go well with my bosses, I thought. Looking around some more, I quickly noticed faint laughter in the distance. I called out with authority, my name and job title. I then explained the harsh penalties that would come if whoever was responsible didn't show themselves now, and also stop causing damages to the mall. I was met with silence. Clearly, if an actual human being was around, they were either not threatened by my warnings or were calling my bluff. I took another go around the mall. I wasn't sure what was going on or how to explain it, but I was certain I needed to keep a close eye out in the case that this was all someone's extremely elaborate prank. I was walking past some of the bathrooms when I heard the screaming again. I jumped back for a moment before quickly forcing myself inside the woman's bathroom. There was a stall door that looked shut and locked. I announced myself and slowly got on the ground and looked around. No one appeared to be there, but before I could get up, I heard the lock click and the door open. I got up quickly before hearing giggling once again. Something was wrong with all of this, and I was beginning to become very uneasy. I was about to head out of the bathroom when something caught the corner of my eye. In the mirrors, as I looked at the stalls one by one, something seemed to be floating in the center stall. It looked to be behind a closed and locked stall, but when looking at the stall outside the mirror, it wasn't locked or closed at all. I looked back and everything seemed to match up and look normal again. I should note, right now, though I know this story sounds insane, I don't do drugs or drink or any of that. So I wasn't on anything, especially on the job. I slowly walked out of the bathroom and noticed a carousel begin to start up on its own. I was beginning to really freak out at this point and pulled my phone out, but as I lined up the phone to record what I was seeing, it all just stopped. Weirded out, I headed to the security office to check the cameras. Strangely, there was no footage of the carousel moving at all. Just me standing there with my phone out like an idiot. Deciding I was spooked, but confident there wasn't any living soul in the mall, I decided to leave the office and head out of the mall, locking the place behind me. I went to my truck and waited for the final 2 hours of my shift to end. I just patrolled the parking lot and tried to explain away in my mind what I had witnessed. In the morning, I explained some of the weird stuff I'd been experiencing and wrote a report on it. My boss laughed, but they also wanted to be sure I was okay and if I needed a night off. I told them no. It was probably just my mind messing with me. That's when one of my bosses pulled me to the side and said, "It's alright if I needed a night off." He said the reason they paid me so well is weird things have happened at the mall before, at night, and it has caused many of the night shift workers to abruptly quit. He reassured me and explained to me they didn't think I was crazy. Despite their joking about everything, my boss even began to share some strange happenings in his early days on the job. They were mostly concerned as they had a hard time keeping nighttime security guys and didn't want me to quit. I explained to them, weird occurrences aside, that I love my job and I wouldn't trade it for the world. I came back to my job the next night, excited for a hopefully chill shift. This night, however, was anything but chill. It started off normally enough, but it ended quite differently. I was patrolling the exterior of the mall once again. While making my rounds, I saw a face in the door. It was once again at the back entrance and was coming from the inside. As I looked more closely, the face disappeared. I double-checked the doors and realized there were no broken locks or even what seemed to be any entry of any kind. I went inside and found the carousel lively and going. I quickly rushed over, somewhat annoyed, and screamed to cut it out. The carousel went silent and was off once again. I filed a report in the hopes that someone would check the electrical on the thing, to be sure that it wasn't some easily explained issue with the ride itself. I then went to the office and filed the report before checking the cameras. The cameras were acting weird. They would glitch out, one after another before fixing themselves again. I quickly made my way to the section of the mall that the glitches would be occurring at. There was nothing there. No one was there, but there was a deep chill in the air itself. There was also the smell of sulfur. That's strange, I thought to myself. I began looking around some more. My flashlight began acting up, and as I hit it to fix it, there was a loud screaming. This sounded like bloody murder. It was quickly followed by an inhuman groaning of some kind, and then another trash can which completely flipped across the room into the shutter walls, blocking one of the stores. I freaked out, as the lighting in the mall began to flicker. Terrified, I rushed out of the mall and called the cops. The police came out and checked the place, which was now conveniently silent. They found nothing other than a discarded trash can. They said they saw no sign of anyone, and they even checked our footage. It was there, that thankfully, they did witness the trash can being thrown. They seemed perplexed, but informed me that there was nothing they could really do after talking to me for a bit. They eventually left. My shift was almost up, and I was just about ready to quit entirely. The owner saw the footage and my bosses did as well. They decided they would try to hire another night shift security guard and offered to let me work days after I took a few days off just to readjust my sleep schedule. I took them up on the offer and I haven't worked nights since that night. I'm grateful to my bosses for allowing me to switch shifts, and to this day, I'm much happier dealing with the living than I was dealing with the strange oddities of the dead. I've done some research since and I believe that there might be a demon lurking in the mall. I know that sounds crazy, but the smell of sulfur has really got me thinking about it. Regardless, that's not my problem anymore, and I'm beyond thankful for it. My name is Gary, and I do private security for different companies. Usually that means working late nights. I'll be the first to admit I'm very confident in my ability to protect myself. I used to be in the Marines, and afterward, I got into security detail as a regular line of work. One of the places that contract us has us contracted to watch the rail yard during the late summer hours. This is generally to dissuade stowaways and potential suicides as well, as they can be high in the area. During my time watching the rail yard, I'd caught all manners of homeless or even kids up to no good. The homeless, I usually ran off, and the kids were simple to deal with. I'm a pretty muscular dude and I'm armed. It basically only takes me showing up and explaining to them that they are trespassing to get them to leave. Of all the places I've worked and security I've done, I've never had anything shake me to my core like the incident at a rail yard in Australia a few years back. I'm the first person to tell you. I'm highly skeptical of unnatural happenings. That said, what happened at this job would definitely fit into the category of unnatural. I spent the first few nights on my job rustling up kids, and at one point helping a homeless guy get a job. It was nothing major, and as I said, I don't scare easily. The fourth night on the job, though, I came across something I still can't explain logically. To get straight to the point, it was around 1:20 in the morning when I heard a disturbance in the rail yard. I began slowly moving through train cars, weapon at the ready, and looking for any sign of life. It's eerie walking around a rail yard at night. It feels isolating in a lot of ways, but also you feel like you're being watched at all times. It didn't take me long to reach the source of the noise. I opened the rail car and slowly raised my weapon. Inside it looked like to be a dog of some kind that was eating another dog. The thing is, its guts were splayed all over the car. My first thought was, how the hell did these two get into the car to begin with? Then the thought occurred maybe they somehow stowed away, unnoticed in their hunt for food. One had to cannibalize the other. That's when I noticed this thing was getting angrier as I neared it. There was a low growling, and then it grew much more malicious in its sound, as I got within a few feet of it. The smell itself was nauseating, but nothing horrible in comparison to the things I've seen or dealt with while in the service. I stopped, held my weapon toward the dog, and tried to get it to leave. I tried raising my voice and stomping, but it merely growled before going back to eating the entrails out of its poor victim. I pointed my weapon outside the train car and fired a few rounds off. This dog seemed completely unfazed, which was the first time that clued me that this situation might not be entirely normal. After a while, it stopped, licked its face, and looked at me before rushing off into the night. I recorded the incident in a report and explained to the rail yard owners what I had found. The owners seemed genuinely concerned. They asked me several times what I did to make the dog run off. My story never changed, and once they were satisfied with it, they had someone clean the remains of the other dog and told me I did a great job before asking if they could do anything for me. I simply told them I'd be fine and would be back in a couple of nights when I was on shift again. They thanked me for my work, and I went to my home away from home for the next few nights. I remember not being able to shake the thought of what I had encountered. During my days off, I wasn't scared, but it was a little eerie. I was still perplexed how these two dogs got into a locked rail car. I'm positive it was locked, and I'm certain the doors were shut firmly. I tried to let it go before I knew it. My next night at work was upon me. I came in as the sun was setting, did some paperwork, and soon began my patrol. It was about 11 at night when a kid comes running up to me covered in blood and screaming incoherently. I got the kid to calm down enough that I eventually was able to half discern what he was trying to say. I followed him to the area his friend was at, and to my shock and horror, there was a kid, his stomach ripped open, being eaten by this dog. I put the other kid behind me, readied my weapon, and began firing into the dog. I shot at it a few times, in the head and several times where its heart should have been. The thing fell limp for a moment, and I looked at the dead kid. He must have been around 13 or 14 at least. Definitely no older than 16, and he was dead. I was about to call the police when I see it twitching out of the corner of my eye. The dog, it gets up, and I began firing, out of shock. I must have emptied my entire clip into the thing, when it stands up and I realize, quite quickly, it is growing in form. And it simply isn't a dog. This thing is a hulking 9 to 12-foot figure with red eyes, black fur, and the sharpest teeth I have ever seen on an animal. I freaked out, picked up the still living kid with one arm, while I fired indiscriminately at this beast that now lunged towards us. I took a quick right and heard this thing's claws screeching against the metal of the train cars. I kept running when I heard the thing land on top of the train car in the distance. I quickly pushed the kid up against a train car and motioned for him to be dead silent while waiting. It wasn't long before we heard the sound of a large thud on the top of the train car we were pressed up against. I soon felt drool dripping upon my bulletproof vest, and I prayed silently to God to keep us safe. The thing began sniffing the air before slowly looking down and growling. I shoved the kid forward and told him to run, at which point the thing looked in his direction. I quickly fired a few rounds off before reloading, and it seemed to divert the thing's attention toward me. I was terrified at that moment, but I was grateful I had the focus of this monster and it wasn't thinking about that kid. I ran in the opposite direction the kid had headed while firing off at the beast, which quickly pursued me. I've never ran so quickly in my life. The thing stalked me all the way back to the dead child. I was running out of breath, and when I could no longer run, I just fired every round I could before the thing reached me. It seemed unfazed. The hulking figure now stood over me before roaring out this sheer terror. I pulled a knife out and stabbed it in the side of the mouth. This pissed it off, and I felt a massive backhand that sent me flying into a tree a few feet away. I felt like I might have cracked a rib, as I quickly fell low into some grass and waited. I was terrified, but my previous military training had me in such a way I was in a me or it survival situation. As such, my training took over. The beast was in the area in all of a second and sniffing around again. I could see the bullets inside the skin of this thing, and it still seemed fine. The thing drew closer, and I prepared, holding my breath for a moment until finally it was close enough. I quickly jumped up, ripped my knife out of the thing's mouth, and ducked under another backhand. I then jumped on the monster and stabbed as quickly as I could several times before feeling claws ripping into the back of my vest. I dropped out of the vest and threw my knife. The beast winced and let out a loud howl when the knife hit it in the left eye. I took my opportunity to come at it with all the muscle I had in me, punching this thing a few times in the stomach before attempting to climb it and get my knife. The thing grazed my face with its claw, and I fell to the ground before rolling back and springing to my feet again. It stared at me in rage, and there was suddenly a series of howls in the distance. My knife still in its eye, the thing roared in my face and turned, running off into the night. I had survived, and I reported everything I saw to the police, who dismissed it as a wild animal, and then I asked for a transfer that morning. To this day, I'm not sure what that thing was or why it was out there, but I can say, judging by the howls, there are more than one of those things out there. So yeah, that's my story. If you have any idea what this thing could be, by all means, please let me know. I'm a cop who has been with the New York PD for 14 years. I'm retired now, and a lot of that was because of my final call. A few years ago, I was asked to respond to a call about strange noises bothering a woman in her 80s. The woman owns a mansion and I was nearby, so I said I'd respond to the disturbance. It didn't take long for things to be off. I initially pulled up and noticed all the lights were off and things were rather quiet. I announced my presence, but no one seemed to respond. I tried announcing myself a few more times before trying the front door. It was unlocked. This was strange, as this older woman lives alone and there's no way she felt comfortable leaving her door unlocked. My initial worry was that maybe she forgot to lock it. As I continued to investigate and continued to call for the woman, I began to realize something wasn't right. The first telling thing was that as I searched up and down the place, I could find no older woman and no presence of anything going on. There was no sign of anything being awry. No worst-case scenario body-finding situation. Nothing. When I tried to radio to dispatch that I had found nothing and was going to head back after one more sweep, things got very strange. For starters, I was getting no response and I was getting a lot of static through the radio itself. Stranger still, I noticed when I came back to the front of the mansion, the door was closed and locked. I didn't close it or lock the door behind me when I came in. This was enough to arouse suspicion, but what was even stranger was when I started to hear piano music from upstairs. I quickly made my move upstairs, announcing myself once again as I did. I went to the music room and realized the door was now locked. I began pounding on the door, telling whoever was inside to open up, that I was police. The music stopped. There was an immediate click and the door opened. Walking inside, I noticed the lights were still out and no one was around. I had checked the basement earlier and the breakers appeared to be fine. When I tried the lights though, nothing happened. Examining the room further, I noticed a woman fitting the description of the caller in the mirror's reflection. Turning around though, much to my shock, no one was there. I looked back, she was there. I looked behind me, she wasn't. It made no sense. As strange as that was, things got even stranger as I opened the door to the hall and noticed I was in a bathroom. Keep in mind, this is the door I just came through, and there was no bathroom whatsoever. I thought I heard someone behind me, and spun around only to find the hallway from before behind me and the piano playing in the room across the hallway. How was this possible? I walked slowly up to the music room and attempted to open it, but it was locked. I decided to try to call for backup. Once again, my radio wasn't working. Thinking I'd go back to my car and try to radio it in, I headed downstairs. That's when the strangest thing happened. As I headed downstairs, I noticed an all too familiar hallway. There was no reason for this hallway to stretch on as long as it did, and these stairs, well, to put it simply, the stairs weren't this long before. After some more walking, I realized I seemed to be looping back to the same hallway. The piano in the music room somehow resonated through the entire mansion as I tried to get back downstairs. It was when I went back up, I noticed the door to the music room was cracked open. It looked like blood, and at the piano was a woman in a white dress. This was creepy enough, but as I approached the woman, she turned toward me. It was when I realized she had no eyes, and the most disturbing smile I'd ever seen. The door behind me slammed and locked, and I drew my sidearm, telling the woman to stop playing music, at which point there was a loud note, and all the music stopped. I was more than a little unnerved at this point. I began to ask the woman, my weapon still drawn, who she was, and if she'd seen an older woman in her 80s in the mansion. The woman simply smiled before tilting her head back. There was a snapping sound, and she opened her mouth widely, letting out a strange crying sound which quickly filled the room and made me put my weapon away, gripping my ears as I did. My vision seemed to twist and shake and blur, as I struggled to keep my senses. I felt myself fading in and out for a moment before the crying stopped, and I looked around to find the lights on and no one around. I was visibly shaken and bolted out of the room. I checked my radio, which now only emitted a low static sound. I tried to radio out anyways as I ran downstairs. I got nothing in return. I reached the bottom of the stairs to find a very wide hallway there and the entrance where the door used to be. What in the world was happening? Was I sick? Was I seeing things? What was happening? I began to question my sanity when my radio came to life.
Officer, please respond.
Yes, I responded. I'm here, can you hear me? I need backup. I'm not sure what's happening here, but I need backup. I was met with the low sound of low static. There was a strange, almost chanting or humming coming from deep within the hall now. I walked forward, slowly, flashlight in hand and weapon in hand. A million thoughts were racing through my mind at the moment. I couldn't begin to grasp or understand what was happening, but I was fairly certain I was indeed seeing it. As I got further down the hall, I realized there was a deformed crying. It was like a maddening and warped cry for help. That is when I saw an old-looking arm, and then heard screams as it dragged around a corner. I rushed forward without a second thought, only to turn the corner to find the staircase from the entrance. It sounded like it was raining outside, and I turned to find the entrance to the house, but it was chained shut. What the hell? It certainly made no sense at all, and after a while, I studied the door itself. There was a pentagram and more strange symbols I didn't have the first clue how to understand. The door shook for a moment, like someone was banging from the other side. I turned and walked back toward the stairs when I heard the sound of chains falling to the ground. I spun around and watched as the chains fell to the ground and the door burst open. There was what looked like a vast, unnatural darkness outside, and from it, I saw a mutilated version of myself. I flipped out and began discharging my weapon. Seconds later, I noticed there was nothing there, but the sound of quiet in the entrance door, looking normal. There were no symbols and nothing off about it at all. I checked my weapon to only realize I hadn't fired it at all. I freaked out and ran for the door. I unlocked it, ripped it open, running to my patrol car. I got inside and locked my doors before sending word to dispatch that I'd investigated the house and found no one inside. The dispatch came confused and I explained how I got a call from them earlier in the night to investigate strange noises going on in this 80-year-old woman's mansion. They were confused at my words and said they never sent my unit that way. I told them maybe I made a mistake and finished the night off at the precinct office, doing paperwork before resigning the moment my shift was over. I'm not sure there's a logical explanation for the call I know I got or the events that transpired, but it was enough for me to say goodbye to my job. I now live comfortably in a different city, far from New York, doing an entirely different job. Needless to say, I was more than a little weirded out by my experiences, and I hope I never go through something like that again. I'm a trucker, and you can call me Dan. Being a trucker by nature means a lot of very late nights, so I figured this would qualify for the topic. I meet a lot of people on the highways of the good old US of A. I'm a proud patriot and former soldier. I'm also single and the nights can get lonely on the road. My experiences started after a haul from Washington State to New York. I have been moving food mostly at this time. Nothing perishable, mind you. Anyway, the trip to New York was peaceful enough. The trip back home, though, was anything but. I'd like to state in advance that I picked up hitchhikers fairly often when I'm not actively hauling something. I know they say it isn't safe, but I can handle myself pretty well and I'm armed if anyone should try to cross anything. All that said, I was driving through a lonely road in Montana when I saw a young woman on the side of the road. She looked to be in her 20s, had long curly blonde hair, blue eyes, and appeared to wear a purse or pouch of some kind on her back. Now it was strange for someone to be walking alone, at night, down a dark road like this, and I became concerned for her safety. I stopped my truck and asked if she would be alright. She said she was headed west and was wondering if she could hitch a ride with me. I told her hop in and soon we were off. The girl wore black jeans and a gray shirt. I asked her what she was doing on the road so late at night. She explained that she had just gotten out of a horrible relationship with her previous boyfriend that was abusive. She said she didn't really have a way to get back home and wanted to start anew. She didn't really want to wait either, as it was too far for her parents to drive, so she started hitching rides. I asked if she was sure I didn't want to take her to the police, but she explained her boyfriend was several states back and it wouldn't help at this point. She said she was simply happy to move on with her life. I understood and dropped the subject. We sat silently for about an hour and a half before she asked if I was a serial killer. I remember being so taken back by how out of the blue the question was, and I couldn't help but let out a deep laugh. The girl seemed amused by this and smiled at me. She then jokingly told me she had to ask, even though I probably wouldn't tell her if I was. I nodded and told her no. I was too old and my life was rather sedentary, and so I didn't have the time or energy to pick up killing as a hobby. This young lady then began laughing even harder and mentioned how being on the road would make it really easy to do. I nodded and told her I'm sure it would before reassuring her I wasn't in the killing trade. I asked how old she was, and she told me 20. She explained that she was going to college back where her boyfriend lived, but she had to drop out when she left. Looking at her shirt, I realized this added up. The young woman then laughed and asked what I was hauling previously. I told her it was just some non-perishable foods, mostly canned goods. I then asked her what her name was. The woman told me her name was Denise. I told her it was nice to meet her and she can call me Dan. I then asked me what state specifically she needed me to take her to. Denise said Washington. I thought this was an interesting coincidence, but it was nice to have company, so I wasn't about to complain. I told her she was in luck as I was headed that way and she could tag along for the rest of the way, but we need to figure out sleeping arrangements as I didn't want her to feel uncomfortable. I even offered to get a motel with separate rooms, but she insisted I sleep in my cab and she could lay up front. I told her she could have the cab and I would lay up front if needed. After a bit of debating about it, she agreed. We stopped in a truck stop not too long after and she headed back. I laid up front, locked the doors before stretching across the seats. I knew it wasn't going to be the most comfortable period to sleep, but I was ready to get home, so I figured I wouldn't sleep much anyway. Also, I really didn't want Denise to be uncomfortable. I was taught growing up that you treat your guests with the same respect as you wish them to treat you. Being a trucker, the truck is home in many cases, so I did just that. I was about to doze off when I felt some poking me in the side. I awoke to Denise staring at me. She claimed she was cold, and she didn't really have the money to pay me for my help, and was wondering if she could thank me in a different way. I felt her hair in traveling, and I won't lie, I was definitely tempted to take her up on her offer, but I couldn't do it. I'm a man of morals and I prefer to really get to know somebody before having sex. Also, I don't want to take advantage of women. I told Denise don't worry about payment, it was just nice to have company and she didn't need to pay me in any way. She smiled and she said I was sweet and asked if I had a wife. I told her I was a single man, but I wouldn't take advantage of the situation. She kissed me on the cheek and said thank you before going back to bed. I noticed she wasn't complaining about being cold anymore. Just in case, I informed her I had another blanket in the compartment in the back. I then zoned out and crashed. It was late in the afternoon when I woke to a note of thanks and a woozy feeling in my head. The note said, I was woozy because Denise had extracted some of my blood while I slept. She never said what she was using it for. She apologized if it had upset me in any way. The note also said, I should get some food in me. Now, I know you can't really sell blood for anything, so I'm not sure why she wanted my blood. I hope that wherever she is, whatever she was actually up to, that she is okay. I've worked as a coroner for my entire career. There are all sorts of unexplained deaths that happen every day that most people will never realize. I've seen it all from slips in bathtubs to death from seemingly nothing. Still, nothing has ever been so disturbing to me as a late night about 12 years ago when I was examining a body. I'm fairly used to long hours and strange happenings. In many ways, it's part of the job. That said, this type of thing isn't. I got a Jane Doe who came in, who was murdered. The case of death was decapitation. After examining the body for quite some time, I stopped to take a short break. It was late, probably around midnight. I didn't check the time to be certain when I was chilling out and taking a moment to think. As I was doing this, I heard a woman's voice behind me. It was more of a whispering, but it was distinct enough that I'm sure I heard it. Turning around, I looked at the body on the table. There wasn't another living soul in the room besides me. As I approached the woman's body, the lights above her body flickered for a moment. I was confused, but I'm a fairly rational-minded individual and assumed that the bulbs were getting old or it was an odd electrical anomaly. I remember looking down at the body and trying not to think about the fact that this Jane Doe was someone's family, and unless we could identify her, whoever her family was, if she had any left, would never know what happened to her. That sort of thing happens more than people realize as well. It's a sad reality of mine, but I have to live with it in this line of work. I finished up my break, and as I looked up I thought I saw someone in the double doors. I walked up to check who it might be, and in the door, I saw a headless woman. I tripped out as the Jane Doe was headless as well. She was just standing there for a few moments before pressing against the door. The door opened, and no one was there. The image I'd seen had vanished. Shortly after this, I felt a cold chill pass through me. I wasn't sure what to think, but I decided not to focus too much on the oddities and go back to examining the body. In a weird sort of way, I thought if somehow it was a ghost, maybe she wanted to find out who she was. Another thing to note about the body was she was missing her fingers. This was disturbing, but she had been murdered, so it wasn't very strange per se, I guess. I tried every way imaginable to get some kind of identification on the body. I couldn't, however, as any and all ways of identifying them outside of DNA were not present to do. Also, it wouldn't help if someone didn't come and identify the body themselves. To this point, we had no family come by, and there wasn't anyone claiming to know who this person might be. Frustrated for much of the rest of the night, I went home soon after putting the body in proper storage. It was while sleeping I had a strange dream. In the dream I saw a woman. I watched her being decapitated and watched as post-mortem her killer cut off the fingers and collected them. This was an unnerving dream to have, and I was put off when I first awoke. It was also very frustrating as my dreams weren't going to magically bring this poor woman's killer to justice. And also, it almost seemed like my dreams were taunting me with the fact that we didn't know who this girl was. I should also note that the dreams felt very real. I felt like I was in the body of the killer, and it felt all too real. I woke up sick that morning from the sight and smells I experienced in the dream. When I finally returned to work, I finished up everything I could do with my examination, and sadly was no closer to identifying the woman. In my dream, I couldn't see her actual face. It was just whatever the face imprinted itself in my dream. I'm a man of science, so I don't put any stock into dream interpretation or dream-solving murders. I'll admit, things were strange around this case, but it wasn't for me to solve, and if I didn't have the means to do so, I shouldn't be hurting myself trying. I'm aware that this is going to come across as cold, but if you work in my profession, you have to understand it isn't easy and you can't get super attached. By the time someone comes into your lab, you do all you can do to find an ID, and if you have that, but no cause of death, a cause of death. You try to verify causes of death, and you do it respectfully. Sadly though, there are times we are left with mysteries of which we will never truly solve. The death has already happened, and beyond our doing. You can't develop a personal connection over a body. That isn't to say that you don't do your damnedest to get a result, but I hope you understand what I'm saying. I've been haunted by the dreams of being the killer yearly since I started working that case, and to be honest, I've never had this issue with other cases or victims. I'm not sure why this one bothers me the most, but it clearly has a grip on me, and it still haunts me to this day. To those listening to this, I'm sorry that there isn't more closure. Sadly, in life and my profession, this happens. Perhaps it was the brutality of it all that has this case on my mind, or maybe it's not having answers. But wherever you are now, Jane Doe, I hope you are at peace, and I'm sorry I never found out who you were or who killed you. So I used to be a security guard at a homeless shelter earlier this year. I worked there for 5 months before leaving. So, back in March, I was at work doing what I needed to do. On the ground floor was a daytime-only homeless shelter, and on the top was a government homeless outreach office. This is who my contract were through, but I had to keep the entire building secure even though the shelter was a different organization. The government office was the mental health branch, so it wasn't uncommon for crazy people to, well, act crazy. This particular day, an individual came up to pick up his medication. The man took the medication, walked over to the couch, and sits in the office. The place is laid out like a doctor's office and is posted in the lobby. After sitting down, the guy starts digging through his backpack and pulls out a bag of white pills. This instantly catches my attention. He grabs his pocket knife, doesn't open the blade, and smashes 3 or 4 pills, uses his hands to make it into dust into 3 lines, then snorts all the dust up. What remained, he swept and flung off the table. This is how, I guess, he took his medicine. This is now considered to be acting hostile and potentially illegal. So I walked over and start trying to ask the man to leave. He keeps telling me, I gotta take my meds. I inform him that he needs to leave some more, when he says out loud without looking at me, you know I got a suppressed 9mm in my bag. That'll make you and that receptionist shut up. Alarm bells start ringing. I now have a potentially active shooter scenario on my hands, and I'm an unarmed officer. I calmly walk back to the receptionist and whisper to her to get the other client up, call 911, and go lock herself in an exam room and do not open the door. She does this all as well as informs the other co-workers of the situation. They all lock and barricade the doors. There are cameras in the lobby, so this all was recorded and turned over to the police. After many attempts to get the man to leave and informing him that the police were called and en route, he gets up, gets in my face, and tells me quietly, I'm coming back for you one day, and storms out. The police arrive 5 minutes later. They examine the footage and put an APB on the man, and take samples of the powder left on the table. A few days later, I'm informed that the man was found with no guns, no drugs, and the powder turned out to be antipsychotic medication. He had allegedly lost the bottle they came in. Nothing had happened, but still, as a 19-year-old unarmed security guard, it scared the hell out of me. For those curious, I still work for the same company, but I now work third shift in a completely different location.
A little over a year ago, I had a job working overnight at a gas station close to my house. I'm a woman and was 31 at the time. I know to some it seems unsafe for a woman to work graveyard shift by herself. However, it was a slow store, and the sheriff's office was about 20 feet across from it. I really didn't think I would have that many problems. There would be about 30 customers in an 8-hour shift, and that was on a busier night. It was about 3:30 in the morning. I went outside to sweep the parking lot, and last minute check the trash. It was time for a cigarette, and I had one headphone in, kinda jamming out. Across the road in the parking lot of the sheriff's office, I saw a figure with his back to me. He was swaying back and forth while looking down. Honestly, it looked like he was enjoying a much needed piss. Against the sheriff's office though? Yeah, the building closes at 4 p.m. and doesn't open again till 6 in the morning. But why? By the back of his ripped white t-shirt, I remember that he had come in about 4 hours earlier. He was a total creep, and I could already tell he had a good buzz going. I didn't say anything. I just took my eyes off of him and tried not to draw attention to myself. It was working until a car pulled in. I was still outside as they pulled up. I saw him look at the car and then at me, and back and forth again. As the customer is leaving, I walked her outside. I still had half a smoke burning, and had left my dustpan outside with the squeegee. We both heard him start to swear angrily and seemingly engage in an argument with himself. She looked across the road and told me to be careful. I made an awkward joke about him being the one who should be afraid of me, or something like that. The man was still there but closer to the road, now facing the parking lot of my store. Whatever he's yelling was completely unintelligible. He was obviously very drunk and can barely stand upright, still swaying away. I didn't engage him, but I didn't take my eyes off of him this time. I just slowly walked back into the store. Something about his face really bothered me. It had a darkness to it, but his eyes looked wild. My experience during graveyard jobs has been that the crazy-eyed ones are the worst ones. I didn't like it at all, and wanted no part of it. I still had almost 3 hours to go, and 2 before any other employee got there. Instantly, I went to the computer and typed up a temporarily closed sign, just in case he wanted trouble. I was coming around the corner on my way to the doors when I saw that he'd walked across the road to my side now. I literally just barely got the second door locked when he stumbled into our very small parking lot. My hand makes the mimed hand signal for cut across my neck, basically saying, nope, sorry, you can't come in here, we're closed. I shook my head back and forth in hopes to farther discourage him. He started walking away but screamed something at me while he's walking. I don't mean he was grumpy and shouted at me or yelled that I was an asshole or anything. I mean like he was at an enraged volume and was violently throwing his hands everywhere, definitely knowing I'm in the wrong shift of the wrong job. I got really skeeved out. I decided to call the cops. It's a good thing too, because the minute I hung up with them, there he comes again up to the door. He starts pulling and banging on it. He backs up and runs into it, trying to ram it. Not that it would have done any good. I made the mistake of telling him that I had called the cops, and his ass was about to be grass. I say I made the mistake of telling him because once I said that, he took off. The police never found him. They drove around the road and surrounding neighborhoods for over an hour, but found no one. He was on foot, so I don't get where he could have gone to. He didn't harm me, and with them not finding him, I didn't fill out a police report or anything. I was safe behind thick glass doors that were locked for the rest of my shift. It just sucked. Maybe if I didn't warn him ahead of time, I wouldn't have had to spend the last 3 months of my job constantly looking over my shoulder. I'll never know what the right choice was. I'm just glad I don't work there anymore.
So this happened a little over 2 years ago now, and I wanted to post it somewhere just to look back at it one day and never forget the lesson I learned. So I figured sharing it on your show was the best way to do this. It was 2016, and I had just started a new job at a motel. It was a low pay, but I needed an office job. One of my friends, Michael, got me this job for a few days. I did training with the owner in the mornings. For 2 nights, Michael trained me. Our job was the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. Nothing exciting. Checking guests in and doing paperwork. My boss, the owner, went away with his wife on vacation for about a week, which is attributed to the swift training I had to endure. So, it was my first night alone on the night shift. There was a monitor with security cameras around the motel's property and a large glass window all around the office building with a glass door. There was no night window like most motels have. It was fairly early in the night, at about 1 a.m., and I was just doing my normal check-in paperwork when a man walks in and asks if we have any rooms available. Usually, if someone is sketchy, my boss has me lie and say no, but he seemed normal at the moment. Without hesitation, I said, "Yes, of course, just for one?" And he replied yes. So I began creating the reservation on the computer, when I noticed he started swatting the air and making spitting noises as if he was surrounded by flies. I tried to ignore it. As far as I was concerned, it wasn't my business. So I tried to check him into the room as quickly as possible. I give him his key and he's on his way. At this point, I could be described as very timid. I had a lot going on in my personal life, so I hope you can all understand my reaction to what happens next. The man comes back from his room and slams his hand on the glass door and causes me to jump. Absolutely frightened, I look up to see him just staring at me. He cracks the door and puts his head through and says, "I can't get into my room. Why won't you let me into my room?" And my only defense is trying to be helpful, so I replied, "Maybe there's something wrong with your key. Let me give you another one." The look he had in his eyes was inexplicable. I felt like I was in absolute danger. I handed him his new key, and he went back to his room. I tried texting Michael because he is the one who trained me, though it was the middle of the night and he was probably asleep. I needed some guidance. With no reply from Michael, I noticed the man trudging down the stairs to come back, and I go into an absolute panic. I run into the back office and lock the door, and I pull out my pocket knife. It's important to keep protection when working at night. I hear the man in the office yelling, "Hello? Hello? Why won't you let me into the room? Do you not like me?" Me being an absolute idiot and not standing my ground and calling the police when I'm feeling scared, I decide to take the situation on alone. I reply, "I'm just on the phone, I'll be right out." And I start calling Michael over and over for help. No answer. I decide to take a few deep breaths and then step out of the office. The man was not there. He was in the bathroom. I started hearing him talking to himself angrily saying, "Kill her, kill her." My heart sank. Still being an idiot and not calling the police, he comes out and say, "Your key was broken. I'm sorry. Let me escort you to your room." He agrees, thankfully. I was wearing a long sleeve sweater, so with my arms down, I was able to hide my knife in my hand while holding it. I began to walk outside and he seemed insistent to walk behind me. We began making our way to the staircase and up towards his room. I was sweating from how nervous I was, continuously looking behind me to make sure he wasn't going to make a move. He stops at a room, and I stop at his room, a few doors down. I smile and say, "Oh, that's the wrong room, this is your room," as it clearly said on the door. The whole time he was going to someone else's room and trying to open the door. I felt bad for them. I quickly ran back to the office and locked the door. The next guest I checked in was a police officer from a few towns away. I felt bad for confiding in them about the guy, but they seemed willing to keep an eye and ear out. The next night the man came back, but I had the doors locked and told him we were all booked up. I explained to my boss what happened when he got back from vacation. However, he didn't take me seriously. I continued to work there on the night shift for the next year, where many other strange encounters happened. My story is definitely not poop your pants scary or anything like that, but it has left me shaken and very uneasy about working late night shifts. Anyways, I had just finished my first year of university, and I had taken up a position as a taxi dispatcher with my boyfriend's cousin's taxi company. For the first week and a half, I worked mainly day shifts until the owner decided to extend the hours to 24/7, and I was the lucky employee who would be covering 3 or 4 of these shifts a week. The next week I was working my first night shift alone. The driver would be out all night looking for fares, which meant a lot of the night would just be me. I wasn't uneasy working such a shift by myself since I had worked a 24-hour coffee shop and was used to midnight shifts. It was also a Wednesday or Thursday night, so it wasn't very busy. The best part about this job was that my boss let me use the internet to play video games on my laptop in the office. From the computer desk in the office, I could see the front door, a portion of the front desk, and most of the front windows, so I could keep a close eye on what was happening around outside. Plus, the bell above the door always alerted me to a new customer, so I wouldn't be caught off guard if I was too into my game. On this particular night, I was working with a taxi driver named Dave. Dave is about 6'3" and 300 pounds, plus he suffers from several health problems, one of which made all of his movements slow and painful. He definitely wasn't Mr. Fitness or the type of person who would be able to defend themselves or others very easily. Sometime during the early hours of the morning, around 1:30 or 2 a.m., Dave gets a call to go pick up someone in a town 15 minutes away. He gathered up his stuff and drove into the night while I headed into the office and continued playing my video game. About 15 minutes later, I caught something over the top of my laptop. My mind froze. I could hear panting in the reflection of the window. I could see someone sitting on one of the waiting chairs. I walked to the doorway that connects to the front room with the office. I glanced into the sitting area and nearly shit bricks. Some guy with a massive rat tail had managed to ninja his way into the office and was now sitting in one of the chairs with his face buried in his hands, panting heavily. He was dirty, sweaty, and sounded like he had just run a marathon. Now, the rat tail should have tipped me off, but I found him more hilarious than frightening. A few moments passed and I finally got up the courage to ask him if he needed a cab. He didn't respond at first. I asked him again and he looks up at me. I took a step back into the office. His face was scratched and covered in blood from the wound on the top of his head. I was shocked and immediately offered assistance to him. He replies, "I'm fine. I don't need any help, I just want to go home." I asked if he needed a cab and if so, where he was going. He told me he lives about 20 minutes away and he wants Dave to take him home. After that, he started to get really weird. I called over to Dave using the radio to tell him that there was a fare in the office and that he wanted a ride. He told me he'd be another 10 minutes. My hand was on the phone the entire time in case the guy made any sudden movements. Instead of going back into the office, I decided it was best to stay out front where there were 2 great big bay windows that would make it easy to see what is happening inside the taxi office. I didn't feel as though he was a threat at all, but he seemed really angry at something, so I wanted to make sure that if something happened to me, people would be able to see it. So I walked out into the front room as they got closer to the gentleman. That's when I see it. He's not just bleeding from the head, but from the shoulder and knee. I ask him again if he's okay, and then I offer to call an ambulance for him. Bad idea. "You don't need to be doing that," he told me. "It ain't like I killed nobody, okay?" I'm sorry, I just noticed that you were bleeding pretty badly and thought that maybe you would like someone to make sure you're okay, I replied. I didn't kill nobody. That asshole should have kept his mouth shut. He should have known what was coming to him. He shouldn't have said those things. It ain't like I killed nobody. You don't need to call anybody, I just want to go home. Okay, I tell him, but you're bleeding. It ain't like I killed nobody, he replied. I swear I didn't kill nobody. Please don't call the cops. I don't need the cops. I just want to go home. Silence for a few minutes. He notices the phone clutched in my hand. I fell down, he blurted out. Pardon? I fell, he repeated. That's why I'm bleeding. It ain't like I killed nobody. He got up and started pacing. He was growing impatient for his cab, and I was scared shitless. Blood was now on the chair and floor. I had the phone in my hand, and every once in a while he broke the silence with another string of incoherent babbling about how he had done nothing wrong because he hasn't killed anybody, and I didn't need to call the cops because he was a good guy. Eventually, Dave radios over that he is about 2 minutes away, and I breathed a sigh of relief. He pulled up out front, the man gets into the car, and they drive off. Now I'm worried for Dave, so I call the cops. I reported what happened, and they followed the taxi cab to this guy's house where they arrested him. Turns out this guy had run away from a nearby bar after he had physically assaulted a fellow patron. To what extent, I never found out. Apparently he injured him with a sharp object, I assume a pocket knife or a needle, took off running, fell, and managed to find his way to the taxi office. During this time in the cab, the police had been searching for him. So technically, no, he didn't kill anyone, but he did assault and attempt to kill someone. I also found out that one of the other drivers, Steven, knew the guy from high school years ago. His name is Duke, explains the rat tail, and has a history of violence. He also has a history of coming home drunk and cracking his wife's skull open from time to time. Whether he had planned to that night, I couldn't say, but I'm just glad that the guy ended up in the drunk tank for the night. His wife was unharmed and the guy who got stabbed didn't die. At least, I assume he didn't, since I still see Duke every now and then walking the streets with his glorious rat tail, which means he didn't get arrested. In all seriousness, I wish you guys could have seen his rat tail. That thing was impressive. It may not be dramatic or particularly scary to some people, but I wanted to share this experience anyway, so thank you for allowing me to do that. I recently got a job at a hotel downtown from where I live. I have never worked in the hotel industry before, so I had no idea what to expect. The time between applying for the job and being hired was less than 24 hours, which made me kind of nervous, honestly. But I had been looking for several months and couldn't find anything, so I thought I'd take a chance. This hotel is about 150 years old and has plenty of character. Behind the front desk, there are places where the wallpaper was torn away, revealing this psychedelic wallpaper from what I can only guess was the 70s. We're talking a bright pink, neon green, hookah-induced vision type of wallpaper. The walls and the upper floors are painted bright orange and yellow, and the hallways are narrow enough to give off a shining kind of feel to it, but I'll elaborate on that later. My manager is a young Chinese man in his mid-20s, only 5 years older than me. The man who owns the building is also Chinese, and literally a walking stereotype. The owner is friendly and kind to the employees, but he's also rich enough that he doesn't really care if the hotel isn't up to par. I learned recently that he also owns one of the more run-down shopping centers downtown, so this might explain the less than 5-star quality of the hotel. Probably about a 3.5 star, in my opinion. Some people describe the place as quaint, unique, and full of characters, while others describe it as outdated or disappointing. As a history enthusiast, I would agree that the place is full of character, but I also think the owner should be a little more concerned about keeping the place clean. There are lots of problems in this hotel, including mice, broken toilets, falling ceiling tiles, leaks, and other maintenance nightmares. The fancier rooms on the upper levels have real fireplaces in them, so that adds the risk of fires at the hand of careless guests. Mice are a common problem, and I'm thankful the guests don't have to see all the dusty traps filled with dead rodents in the basement. By far, the most interesting aspect of the hotel is that it's supposed to be haunted. There are 2 ghosts that have been reported in the building, as well as the adjoining pub next door. Back when the hotel was first built, it had the reputation of being a complete dive. A lady named Lady Churchill died in the hotel, and her spirit supposedly lingers in the haunted room 49. Guests will occasionally smell her perfume or see her face in the mirror. One of the most frightening stories included someone opening the door only to have Lady Churchill fly at them in fury. On my first day when my boss toured me around the hotel, he pointed out the haunted room to me. Lady Churchill has also been spotted at the fireplace in the pub arguing with her boyfriend and the other resident ghost, Brady. Brady was apparently stabbed to death on the basement stairwell. The stairwell is not in use anymore, as it leads from the street directly into the basement. Instead, it's used to store extra chairs and miscellaneous items. The light is never turned on, which adds more of a creep factor. My shift is the day shift from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. Every morning when I come in, I have to check the entire hotel by myself in search of homeless people sleeping in the back stairwell or trying to get in through the basement. I'm not an intimidating person. I'm a short female, not physically fit, and too friendly for my own good. If I did find someone hiding in the hotel, what was I supposed to do about it? I'm not sure which creeps me out more. The fact that I'm going around looking for people who shouldn't be there, or the idea that I have to walk through the dark and silent areas known to be haunted all by myself. My sweep of the hotel includes all 4 floors of guest rooms, the kitchen, the back stairwell, the basement stairwell, and the basement. To give you some context, the back stairwell serves as a fire escape connecting all the floors together. It goes straight down to the street level. It's always cold and echoey in there, and as I said before, full of dead mice. When I was first told about the haunted stairway, I mistakenly thought they meant the fire escape stairs that go down to the basement level. The 4 floors for guest rooms in all their overlook hotel glory are shaped like a square horseshoe, which means more than enough blind corners where creepy twins might suddenly appear are definitely there. Lady Churchill's haunted room is at the end of a hall around one of these blind corners, and yes, I do think about that every time I search the hotel. There is an elevator and interior stairway that one guests are supposed to use. Behind the elevator is the old connecting hallway that basically serves no purpose anymore. In the past it may have been useful, but now it just serves as a secret passageway that goes behind the elevator and comes out at the other end of the horseshoe. This hallway especially needs to be searched for homeless people, drunks, or people having sex. The basement is by far the creepiest part of the hotel. To get there, you can either take the elevator or go through the pub and down the stairs. I prefer to go through the pub because there are some fascinating black and white photos from when the hotel was first built, and I love to look at them. It's also the best place to see the age of the brick foundation. Anyway, the basement is used for storing beer kegs, firewood, planter pots, housekeeping items, and maintenance tools, among other things. It's usually deserted. Now that I know the dark, unused basement stairway is where Brady's spirit is supposed to be, I think I'll try to spend even less time down there. This week is my 2nd week of work, and my boss has put me on the afternoon and evening shift, just so I can get a sense of what it's like in case I have to cover anybody in the future. Yesterday was my first late shift, and in the time I learned a whole bunch of things I didn't know from the lady I worked with. This woman, let's call her Peggy, has been at the hotel for 14 years. She's seen all there is to see and, well, is known for her stories. I've listened to some of these stories and honestly, part of me thinks she's full of crap, but the other part's going to cautiously believe her, on the off chance that it's true. Here are some things I learned about the hotel in the span of one shift. The man I'm replacing was not actually fired for chronic lateness, as the boss told me, but instead for sexual harassment. The head of housekeeping, a man I get along very well with, is a friend of his. The day before, Peggy caught a drug addict rooting around in the private back office after hours. We looked over the security footage and he was definitely searching for something. We now keep the office doors locked. There were 2 guests several years ago who stayed at the hotel, and the next day, they robbed a jewelry store downtown and fled back to the hotel with everything they'd stolen. There was a massive police standoff on the roof, SWAT teams and all. There's a news article about it online, otherwise I never would have believed it. The bedrock of the hotel can be found in the boiler room. There's a slight gap filled in on the top right corner that connects directly to the street. One time, Peggy came down to the boiler room to find a man halfway through the gap head first, trying to get in because he wanted to know what was down there. That image terrifies me. In the span of that one night shift, an alarm went off in the basement. The police showed up at the pub and I guess verbally abused the day staff over non-existent shuttles to the hospital. No, not an ambulance, a shuttle. Taking the bus was beneath him, I suppose. And at my bus stop after my shift, a man was shooting up in public. My city has a drug epidemic going on right now. My bus took half an hour to arrive, and when I got off at my stop, it was as foggy as Silent Hill. I felt as though I would be looking around for Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees. It is October after all. That's one night shift down. I have another tonight and one more the day after. If anything else interesting happens, I'll keep you updated. I mostly just wanted to get this off my chest. It's amazing how different the hotel is after 3 p.m. Much louder, that's for sure. Much louder, that's for sure. Thanks to the pub on one side and the bar on the other. Everyone I've gotten to know during my first week of work has already gone home, leaving me with drunks, strangers, and Peggy's crazy stories. One thing's for sure, after 3 nights of this, I'll never complain about getting up early again. Thanks for listening to these allegedly true, creepy stories from the night shift. If you enjoyed these stories, be sure to hit that like button as it helps me out a ton. If you're new to the swamp, why not subscribe and turn on notifications to never miss a new video, as I upload them almost every single day, and all things natural and supernatural. Much thanks to my friend Slumber Reads who helped me a ton today by reading story number 2. If you enjoyed his reading, be sure to check out his channel in the description down below and subscribe to him. If you have a story you would like to share in a future video, be sure to visit swampdweller.net and submit your story. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. Stories like yours that keep this channel going. You can also get my stories on iTunes, Spotify, and many other places. Be sure to check that out and leave me a review. It helps out this channel a ton. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.